Chapter 738. Pasha was startled and then said in a surprised tone, "It seems that Phyllis is right. You really know a lot about us. As for the divine will, we only learned about it after the fall of Tequila. I don't think Agatha told you about this. Don't forget, the church was defeated by my hands." Roland crossed his arms to cover his chin and pretended to be profound. "Those witches who were in charge of the holy city of Hermes are now imprisoned in Neverwinter." "I see." Pasha was silent for a long time, as if she was quietly sizing him up. Even though he couldn't see her eyes, Roland could feel the tangible scrutiny. After a long time, her consciousness reappeared in her mind. "It's not impossible for you to know what the divine will is, but please keep it a secret and don't tell anyone else." It was the same for everyone present. When one wanted to pursue or protect something that couldn't be seen or touched, they wouldn't fall into despair so easily. But when it became tangible, the psychological pressure would be greatly increased. If it was leaked, it would be disadvantageous for the third battle of divine will. Roland exchanged glances with the other witches and asked in a deep voice, "So the will of God is a tangible object?" "That's right. It's like a transparent God's stone of retaliation. It's shaped like a sharp spindle, but it doesn't obstruct magic, nor does it have any special function." Pasha spoke slowly, as if she was recalling and narrating at the same time. "But as long as you open your heart near it, you can indeed feel the call of the gods and see some incredible sights." "What kind of scene?" "An infinitely wide hall, a crimson moon hanging high above, and 4 incomparably huge paintings. However, the scenes in the paintings are vivid and constantly changing. The ancient which describe the illusion created by the divine will in detail." "What do those scenes represent?" Tilly could not help but ask. Following her question, everyone held their breath. This question has been bothering people for nearly 1,000 years. The Quest Society has been searching for an answer but to no avail. It was not until the documents in the ruins of the labyrinth were deciphered that we were able to confirm this. All the tentacles on Pasha's body were raised. "What God showed us is the humans, the demons, the unknown enemies, and the underground civilization. The shape of the divine will also confirms this. It is not a complete vertebral body, but a quarter of it, so we call it the relic of God. 4 giant paintings, a quarter of the relics." Roland frowned. "Do you mean that every civilization shown in the giant paintings has one such relic?" "Not every one of them. The underground civilization has lost its divine will." Pasha's answer sent chills down everyone's spine. One of the giant paintings fell into eternal darkness not long after the end of the first battle of divine will. Based on the descriptions in the documents and the records passed down by the Union, we have come to the conclusion that it has been removed from the battle of divine will forever. Did this not mean that the war that had lasted for hundreds of years was for the relics in the hands of the enemy, and losing one's own relic was equivalent to losing everything? Roland's frown deepened. This was not good news at all. Compared to the unknown enemies, he was more concerned about who had arranged all this. Was it a coincidence or a necessity? Was it a random choice or a predestined fate? What was the purpose of leaving the relics? Was it related to the bloody moon that came periodically? And most importantly, was the understanding of the survivors correct? A series of questions emerged in his mind, and at the same time, he felt that he had vaguely grasped something. What if the word God was replaced by another title? While he was deep in thought, Tilly asked, "What will happen if we collect all 4 relics? Has God never given us any hints?" "No one knows the answer, and God has never responded to our call," Pasha said calmly. "God does not love mortals. He only favors the victors." How could this be? Just because of a stone of unknown use, they fought each other for hundreds of years? Vendi showed an expression of disbelief. The will of God is too ruthless. Perhaps there is a passage in the document that is very difficult to understand, but it may be able to explain your doubts, the ancient witch comforted. We are all children of God, but only a few of us can usher in the dawn. From the moment we perceive magic power, we are destined to have an extraordinary life. This competition has been going on for a long time, and to be able to reach this point is already 1 in a million. Birds are not birds and we are not ourselves. It is fighting that makes all things continue, and it is competition that makes life eternal. It was as if a bolt of lightning flashed through Roland's mind. What did you say before? He almost rudely interrupted. We are all children of God? No, one sentence after that. This competition has been going on for a long time, and to be able to reach this point is already 1 in a million, Scroll answered him. I have written it all down, Your Majesty. What did this statement sound like? It was like a long road of evolution. From ignorance to civilization, all species that could survive had eliminated countless competitors. The description of the underground civilization coincided with this process. Thinking carefully, these 4 civilizations seemed to be different, but they all had one very obvious thing in common, and that was, they could all use magic power. Humans could produce witches who could condense magic power, demons and the eliminated were even more accomplished. If there was no accident, the other unknown opponent should also have the ability to manipulate magic power. Only then did it fit with the original description. We are all the children of God, should be referring to all species with this extraordinary gift. According to this speculation, the battle of divine will might not be to protect or fight for the legacy of God, but to increase the means of evolution. Or in other words, it was the rule of the magic world. Therefore, the underground civilization felt that the road to approaching God was to climb the magic ladder. Your Majesty, are you okay? Pasha's voice echoed in Roland's mind. I feel that your thoughts are a little confused. Can you see what I'm thinking? I can only accurately feel it when you want to talk to me with your mind, just like what I'm doing to you now. She paused. Do you want to try? That way, the communication will be much faster. No thanks. Roland shook his head with a smile. I'm more used to using my throat and tongue to express myself. As for the confusion, I just thought of something interesting, and it won't affect our discussion. Don't worry. Anyway, there was no reason to talk about rules, and it was understandable to regard them as the work of God. For example, the origin of life on Earth and the later Cambrian explosion. The former was born between lightning and boiling water. Organic molecules constantly collided, fused, and cracked, and finally formed a molecular chain with the ability to self-reproduce. Such a probability was close to impossible. It was as incredible as a gust of wind rolling up a large pile of metal parts and falling down to form a Mercedes-Benz sports car. The latter was even more of a mystery in biology. In the ocean where life was extremely monotonous and basically only algae and softworms existed, the peace that lasted for hundreds of millions of years seemed to have been broken overnight. In a very short period of time, all kinds of animals suddenly emerged. There were so many of them that they almost covered all the categories of the animal kingdom later on. No matter how life evolved, it could not jump out of this framework. Chapter 739. Of course, this was just a conjecture. He could not get a clear answer from the records of the underground civilization alone. For example, if they believed that they had reached where they were today through competition, how could those eliminated opponents with magic power have left traces of their existence? Did the witches appear before the first battle of divine will? Or did the witches have the talent to sense magic power since the primates, or even the lactation era? Or did they simply skip this step and become what they were today because of a victory in a competition? In order to answer these questions, he would probably need a large number of explorers like Thunder. However, the most important goal now was to fight against the demons and solve the problem of survival. Roland believed that as long as he had enough time, he would be able to piece together the original appearance of this world step by step. Has this relic always been kept by the church? No, the Starfall City? He looked at Pasha. Now that he knew this information, it was especially important to protect the relic. Yes, because of the existence of the giant painting, finding a place to bury the relic was just a way to cover one's ears while stealing a bell. It could not prevent the arrival of the battle of divine will, so it has always been guarded by the most powerful witch organization. In addition, magic power was unusually active during the months of demons, and demonic beasts attacked Hermes crazily because of the relic. Pasha moved her huge body so that Roland could see the scene behind her. The corpses of demonic beasts were piled up into two small hills, and light blue blood flowed all over the ground. When we learned that the Starfall city had suffered a heavy blow, we immediately retrieved the relic. Now it is very safe in our hands. How did you stop so many hybrid demonic beasts? Vendi gasped. The instrument of divine retribution can target and strip the magic power from the target. Without the support of magic power, these mutated monsters will soon die. Pasha briefly explained the principle of the instrument of divine retribution. But only when the Chosen One activates it can it truly become a powerful weapon. Strip the magic power? Magic power stripping? Roland keenly noticed that it couldn't be used against ordinary creatures. Can the God's Stone defend against the effect of the instrument? No, and it directly works on magic power. The barrier of the God's Stone doesn't work on it. To be able to cover more than 10 miles without any side effects, this was a pretty good environmental weapon. It was just that the activation conditions were a bit too harsh. He suspected that the underground civilization had only verified this point in theory and had never actually verified it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fallen to the point of being eliminated. Perhaps only in the age of magic would there be such a miraculous sight to be able to create something that they could use. Without a doubt, compared to the underground civilization and the devils who could nurture many abilities, humans were naturally inferior in this aspect. The random awakening and the erratic use of magic power showed the instability of the witches. Perhaps if they were given enough time, they would be able to reach a higher limit, but what they lacked now was exactly time. By the time the Tequila witches found the Chosen One, the steel torrent of Neverwinter would have already reached the demons. Besides, since magic existed in this world, he would not turn a blind eye to it. Therefore, the simplest method was to conduct research on both at the same time, using mana to boost productivity, and then using the rich resources brought by increased productivity to support mana research. He believed that any research project could be carried out with money and manpower, and magic power was no exception. Having learned everything he needed to know, Roland knew that it was time to negotiate. I've roughly understood your situation. First of all, there's no doubt that the demons are our common enemy. It's very necessary to establish a united front of divine will and strengthen mutual assistance and cooperation. What do you think? I completely agree, Pasha said while nodding her tentacles. The Tequila witches don't ask for much. We only hope that your majesty can continue to recruit witches and let Phyllis find the Chosen One. We'll send another god's punishment witch to bring new 5-colored magic stones. That's easy. Whether you have this request or not, I'll expand the number of witches. But he paused and said, I think you should live in another place, such as in the west of the mountain range closer to Neverwinter. This? Your Majesty? What about the demonic beasts? Everyone looked at him, some worried and some worried. Only Agatha's eyes were full of approval, as if she had known that he would do this. Roland looked around and gestured for them to rest assured. Then he looked straight at Pasha on the light screen and said, To be honest, I don't agree with your idea of keeping the relic alone. Once something goes wrong, all our efforts will be in vain. It's not a big deal to attract demonic beasts, but now without Hermes' towering defense line, if the demons launch a surprise attack, are you sure you can defend it? Regardless of whether the disappearance of the underground civilization had anything to do with the relic, Roland would rather believe it than not. It was better to keep such an important relic under his care. At least, he could quickly send reinforcements when the Tequila survivors were attacked. As long as the Annihilation Core is replaced, there's no essential difference between demons and demonic beasts. Celine was not convinced. Of course there are. Demons are much more powerful and cunning than hybrids. From those corpses, we can see that they once approached your core area. If I'm not wrong, your instrument of divine retribution should be not far from the phantom instrument, right? After saying this, Roland noticed that the tiny tentacles on Pasha's body slightly stiffened. If it were the spear-throwing demons, how many magic cores could be preserved? But If you think I can't do a better job, or worry about the relic attracting demonic beasts, you can settle in the front of the Western Mountain Range, near the fertile plains. I'll open a direct mountain road behind you. In this way, even if you encounter danger that you can't handle, Neverwinter can still help you, Roland said frankly. Trust is the foundation of cooperation. Only by placing the relic in a place that both sides think is safe can we establish the most basic trust, right? Pasha stopped talking for a while. The tentacles on her head intertwined with other sarcomas, as if she was communicating with her companions in this way. After about a quarter of an hour, her voice rang out again. Chapter 740. Faced with this question, Roland was stunned at first, and then he could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. You seem to have something else to say? Because it concerns the survival of everyone, we hope that every decision can be fully considered, so. Tequila proposes a joint governance system. In the United Front, the leaders of the most powerful groups would jointly negotiate and issue orders, which could effectively avoid wrong judgments and ensure that all parties had the same interests. Sounds like the Three Chiefs system of the Union. 3 was a suitable number. It could achieve a better balance between the speed of decision-making and the unity of decision-making. Of course, considering the current 4 kingdoms and the witch organizations, it was not necessary to use the 3 chiefs to make decisions. For example, in the early days of the Union, a round-table parliament composed of 11 leaders made up a battle plan. The ancient witch explained. This is undoubtedly a smart decision, Roland thought. Except for Neverwinter, the rest of the human kingdoms, the Witch Union and Sleeping Island, could not have an advantage over the Tequila survivors in terms of strength. The more than 100 perfect God's punishment soldiers did not seem to be a lot, but when faced with ordinary troops and witches, their combat effectiveness was almost overwhelming. In addition, they had fought fiercely with the demons for decades, so they could be said to be rich in actual combat experience. Moreover, they had inherited the magic relics of the underground civilization, so they could be regarded as a force that could not be ignored. If the seats were arranged according to strength, they would definitely occupy a seat in the decision-making group. After that, as long as they maintained communication with other witch organizations and strengthened the natural sense of identity, they could ensure the interests of the Tequila. They might not have any other plans, such as restoring the dominant position of the witches, or turning against the human kingdoms and so on. It was just a cautious act of self-preservation, which was the demand of almost any organization before joining a large group. If it were the new Roland, he might have agreed, but now he was no longer the prince who had just taken over the position of lord and only governed a small border town. Interesting proposal, but the United Front will not implement a joint governance system. It will only have one leader, and that's me. Roland said in an indisputable tone, "This is the most efficient and the most stable way." Modesty was a virtue, but now was definitely not the time for modesty. The 3-leader co-governance might be a good choice for the Union, but it was definitely not the case for him. In this world, he was the only one who understood what was needed for industrialization and how to bring out the greatest potential of the territory. In order to build this framework, all the departments had to become a unified machine, a qualified screw. The orders from City Hall had to be sent to every citizen unimpeded, and the resources had to be coordinated and allocated. If all the policies had to be explained to the other seats, or if the participants whose interests were at stake were to be persuaded, industrialization would not be able to take a big step forward. Probably because his refusal was too direct, the scene became silent for a while. Even the ancient witches were stunned and did not say a word for a long time. Roland cleared his throat and said, "A united front is indeed a guarantee against the demons, but I didn't ask you to join in the first place. Moving to the Western region is just a basis for building trust. Compared with these verbal agreements, I hope you can see it with your own eyes." Look at what? The strength and determination of Neverwinter to fight against the demons, as well as the organizations that have joined us or not, their interests and current situation. On the basis of a full understanding, you can make a free choice, Roland said frankly. Even if you can't make up your mind, we can carry out the most basic cooperation, such as looking for the chosen one, providing experimental materials, and so on, as long as we don't interfere with each other's policies. It's the same even if we don't give you the relics and magic cores? Celine interrupted. It's the same. Roland nodded. In fact, I never intended to defeat the demons with the relics. As for the relics of the gods, as long as they are placed in a place where both sides can ensure their safety, I can accept it. As I said before, looking for the chosen one and ensuring the safety of the relics is the most basic trust. As for the other things, we can cultivate them slowly. I admit that you're extraordinary, mortal. The cold voice from before once again appeared in everyone's mind, but have you ever thought that if one person is in charge of the United Front, it means that there is no room for succession? If the battle of divine will last for decades, when you're exhausted, will your descendants still be able to follow your will and continue to lead the people forward? Only a joint governance system can effectively avoid these problems. I don't think you need to worry about this. Let's not talk about whether the demons can hold on for so long. I'm afraid my lifespan will be longer than all of you combined. Roland did not know whether Zero's lifespan would be inherited by him. After all, her magic power was not preserved, but at this moment he felt that it was necessary to bluff. Rather than using a system that he had never heard of to convince the other party that the successors would not change, it was better to directly explain everything with an unimaginable ability. After a brief description of the characteristics of the soul battlefield, coupled with the unanimous approval of the witches, the living room fell into a long silence. He saw the tentacles of the sarcoma entangled again, and the scales on its body changed from grayish-brown to brown with a hint of red. Obviously, the debate had entered the most intense stage. After a long time, the tentacles dropped down. I see. Pasha's voice became much more serious. But there are too many things to move in the ruins which can't be accommodated by any random cave, so this process will take about a month. In addition, we also need to rebuild the underground palace and laboratory in the Western Mountain Range. I hope you can provide some materials for us. Wait, how are you going to do this? Roland was a little surprised. At first, he had planned to let Lotus connect the countless holes in the underground and give them a simple shelter. After all, it was dark and damp underground, and the bodies of the tequila survivors were not in the category of human beings, so they should not have too many requirements for the living environment. However, it seemed that the other party had amazing construction skills and was planning to build a new palace in the mountain rocks. Chapter 741. Wait a minute, Roland thought. Why does this thing sound like the giant demonic beasts near the Great Snow Mountain? Similar to wild beasts? Before he could ask, Agatha said, Are you the ones who entered Devil's Town and swallowed the Blackrock Tower? Devil's Town? Apart from repairing the ruins and opening up the passage to the City of Glow, we didn't let the devouring worm go anywhere else. After all, it consumes too much food, and we can't afford it. Roland briefly explained the visions the witches had encountered in the Misty Forest and the west of the Western region, and asked Scroll to fetch the picture of the giant beast drawn by Soroya. The traces of the two monsters point to a huge snow mountain, which is much larger than the wild beasts. It is indeed the devouring worm. Pasha took a deep breath after looking at the lifelike picture. I'm afraid that the snow mountain you mentioned also has a relic of the underground civilization. According to the literature, they once spread all over the Land of Dawn, and wherever there were mountains, there were traces of the worms. This could be seen from the inside of the mountains that were full of holes. This record was not exaggerated. But you think that the underground civilization has completely disappeared. Yes, but the worm is just a body. It can be used in the same way as the original carrier. As long as you transfer a part of the soul, you can control it. Hearing this, Roland's heart sank. He looked around and found that the witches in the room also looked serious. Obviously, everyone thought of the same thing. The worms had attacked twice, once against Agatha's research tower, and the other time against Devil's Town. After eliminating the three forces, the only remaining possibility was that race that had yet to show up. Did they find the relic in the Snow Mountain and possess the worm's body? If that was the case, it was not a big deal. Thinking along this line of thought, What if there was also a magic core and central carrier in the Snow Mountain relic? Would the other race greatly improve their magic theory and create an instrument of divine retribution for the witches? In addition, according to the records, the grander the mountain, the larger the city built by the underground civilization. Although the snowy mountains were not as undulating as the impassable Realm and Dragon's Pine Ridge, the main peak was the highest in this area. If there really was a large number of bodies there, he would definitely not leave them alone. Your Majesty, please help us explore this snowy mountain. Celine suddenly said anxiously, if the finished instruments are stored there. There are also the various carriers mentioned in the documents. If they fall into the enemy's hands, I'm afraid they will bring us great trouble. Pasha's voice sounded calm, but judging from her twitching tentacles, her emotions weren't any lower than Celine's. At the same time, there was a clamor of discussion behind the sarcoma. Obviously, this news had caused an uproar among the tequila survivors. Roland quickly understood why they were so excited. Compared with the senseless bodies of the God's Punishment Army, the carrier was much better in this respect, although it had completely lost its human form. At least it could feel cold, hot, sore, and had a certain sense of smell. After being locked in a cage of nothingness for hundreds of years, it was no wonder that they were so concerned about the news of a new carrier. Your concerns are indeed very reasonable. He pretended to ponder. I've been planning to explore the snowy mountains of the western region, but I lacked an effective means of transportation. I didn't want the witches to take risks alone, so I had to postpone it. If we can cooperate with the devouring worm, it will be a good opportunity. We'll start the migration as soon as possible, Pasha replied solemnly. They had been discussing ways to cooperate, but they didn't expect the opportunity to come so soon. In fact, even without the other party's request, Roland would have launched an internal investigation into the snowy mountains. In addition to the need to eliminate the possible threats around Neverwinter, he was also very interested in this carrier that could easily open a large underground tunnel. With a little imagination, he could understand how extensive its uses were. Previously, he had planned to turn the impassable mountain range into a natural barrier against the demons, but it was not easy to achieve this in engineering. The road between the mountains was rugged and steep, and the climate changed greatly. Just the transportation of cement and bricks was a headache. In addition, if he wanted to station the troops for a long time, in addition to the stronghold battery, the barracks, roads, and other necessary living facilities had to be built near the fortifications, which was a great challenge for Hummingbird, Lotus, and the others. However, with the devouring worm, he could completely open a straight tunnel from the back of the mountain and directly connect the defense points on each mountain to the hinterland of Neverwinter. The ammunition storage and barracks built underground could effectively avoid the attacks of the snowstorm, and the flat tunnel could be paved with rails, which could be used to transport soldiers and supplies by steam trailers. The reinforced concrete blockhouse above was the true meaning of the natural moat defense line, and the living area and transportation lines were below. In addition, the underground pipelines and sewage network, which were indispensable for the construction of the city, were not a problem for the devouring worm. He could even claim that in this era, Neverwinter already had an underground drainage system that could allow people to pass through unimpeded. It could be said that before the shield tunneling machine was invented, this thing was simply a divine tool in the civil engineering field, and its function was no less than the instrument of divine retribution and the biological computer. I hope this is the beginning of building trust between us. Roland stood up, walked to the light curtain, and reached out his right hand to the other party. Your Majesty, this is. A handshake means that both sides have reached a preliminary consensus, he said calmly, looking at the giant creature that was several meters taller than him. The latter hesitated for a moment, and then stretched out the thickest tentacle on its head, which spiraled down and touched his palm. Unfortunately, Soroya is not here, Roland thought. Otherwise, this scene would probably be recorded in history. When the illusion connecting the two places began to distort, he suddenly asked, by the way, you said that there may be traces of the underground civilization in every mountain. What about the mountains under the sea? There are mountains under the sea? According to the historical records, Their range of activities is limited to the land of dawn, and there are no signs of them going to the sea. Because most of the carriers are extremely heavy, it is not convenient for them to move in the water. Why do you ask this? Nothing, I'm just a little curious. Roland shook his head. They only appear in the land of dawn. It seems that the strange underwater spire and telescope have nothing to do with them. However, the giant stone gate that the old telescope was staring at, as well as the continent that could only be reached at high tide, whose territory was it? Is it a third party that has been hiding in the dark? I hope Thunder can find the answer. While he was thinking, the purple light curtain distorted and disappeared without a trace. Chapter 742. After nightfall, Vendi came to the door of Scroll's bedroom. She reached out her hand and was hesitating whether to knock on the door when the door was opened. It was Scroll standing behind the door. I knew you would come to me. Scroll smiled. Because I also want to talk to you, just like in the past. Scroll had obviously finished her bath early. Her long wet hair was not tied up as usual, but casually fell on her shoulders. To prevent her robe from getting wet, she also put a towel on her shoulders. The ends of her hair covered her forehead and also hid the wrinkles left by the years. Coupled with the increasingly comfortable life, her skin became plump, and at first glance, she looked much younger. The only thing that did not change was her pair of wise eyes that belonged to an older person. Vendi could not help but smile. In your room or mine? Yours. Nightingale will come back later than Leaf. Okay. You pay for the chaos drinks. Oh. Of course, the one who asks first is responsible for the drinks. Old rules. That's why you were waiting for me at the door. Yes, patience is very important. This is also one of my life experiences. Have you learned it now? Okay. The two returned to the bedroom and cleaned the desk. Vendi took out 2 cups and a bottle of chaos drinks from a drawer and filled the cups. The orange-red liquid reflected a flame-like luster under the reflection of the magic stone. You actually drew this? Scroll took a sip. Good luck. Drinking it in winter is not much worse than drinking fire dragon wine. That's why I said you earned it, Vendi said, spreading out her hands. Don't say that. We all owe it to Miss Evelyn. His Majesty distributed such a variety of drinks to the members of the Witch Union in an interesting way. Every month, everyone had the opportunity to draw a bottle of chaos drinks made by Evelyn. Since they could only see the number before the answer was revealed, no one knew which flavor they would receive. Therefore, exchanging or freeloading food and drinks became an important part of the distribution day. For some reason, Maggie always got the most popular drink, which made people think that Evelyn had leaked it to her. The two of them slowly savored the heartwarming fiery red sweet drink while listening to the howling cold wind outside the window. Compared to the room that was filled with heating, this feeling was undoubtedly intoxicating. They rarely spoke. Sometimes, they could understand each other's thoughts just by looking at each other. In fact, Vendi didn't have anything specific to say. She was just happy from the bottom of her heart. Even now, when she closed her eyes, Roland Wimbledon's words would appear in her mind. There can only be one leader, and that is me. Before this, although she felt that His Majesty was very approachable, she was worried that he would hesitate on some key issues or show weakness that was not suitable for a king. Now it seemed that he was even better than she had expected. Judging from His Majesty's tone and expression when negotiating, the experience of the past 2 years had made him more stable and decisive. What was even more incredible to Vendi was that although Roland had become more mature as a leader, his attitude towards witches and ordinary people was still the same. It was as if it was an instinct of his. Compared to the former, this was the most unimaginable point, especially for a noble of the royal family. She knew that Scroll had also felt this change, which was why she was waiting for her at the door. This was also a habit passed down from the time of the Witch Cooperation Association. When they encountered something good and wanted to share it, Vendi, Scroll, and Kara would always get together, drink a few glasses of poor quality ale, and talk for a whole night. Later, as the conditions became more and more difficult, they could not even drink wine often, so they switched to drinking wild fruits. Unfortunately, as Kara gradually drifted away from them, the good things that could be shared or the beautiful plans for the future gradually turned into worry and confusion. In the end, only Vendi and Scroll were left, encouraging and supporting each other. As the two oldest among the sisters, and also the founders of the Witch Cooperation Association, once they fell, everyone would lose confidence in finding the Holy Mountain. During those extremely difficult days, the two of them had walked all the way. At this moment, it was as if the past had reappeared. By the way, Vendi drank the drink in one gulp and let out a long breath. After the meeting, I gave the test results of the witches in the Kingdom of Wolfheart to His Majesty. What kind of abilities did they have? Scroll leaned back on the bench and replied casually. Vendi roughly described the abilities of the four witches, and deliberately kept Scroll guessing when it came to Broken Sword. Guess who he assigned Broken Sword to? Well, it should be Nightingale or Ashes. Only the two of them can give full play to Broken Sword's power. Scroll thought for a moment and said, although Anna and Leaf have powerful magic power, they are not suitable for fighting the enemy head-on, and the other sisters are almost the same. There are not many real combat witches in the Witch Union. I think the same as you, but His Majesty doesn't think so. Vendi showed a gentle smile. He didn't assign Broken Sword to anyone. Scroll was slightly startled and asked, why? Because he said that weapons generally have to be carried with them, which is tantamount to restricting Broken Sword's freedom. Moreover, the enemy can't always arrive during working hours, and sword energy is not necessarily more powerful than guns. So, instead of becoming a weapon, it is better to cooperate with each witch to test the superimposed effect, and then determine the work according to whether it is interesting or not. According to the degree of interest. Yes, that's what His Majesty said. Compared to considering the use of witches, His Majesty first cared about the other party's feelings. It was probably because of this that Nightingale chose to support him unreservedly. Now that they thought about it, it was fortunate that they finally believed in Nightingale's judgment. Thinking of this, Vendi could not help but grin. She filled up her cup and raised it in front of Scroll. I hope we find a good king. The latter smiled and gently clinked her cup with hers. Yes, to the Holy Mountain. It's empty. After taking a sip, when Vendi wanted to pour more, she found that the bottle of chaos drink had been emptied by the two of them. Should I go back and get my bottle? Scroll also seemed to want to continue. No, since it's an old rule, we have to abide by it. She waved her hand and took out a new bottle of chaos drink from another drawer. But next time, I won't knock on the door so quickly. Wait, this is Nightingale's, isn't it? Yes, she won't mind. Chapter 743. Roland wiped the sweat off Anna's forehead and held her in his arms. In the dim light, he could see the alluring blush on the girl's face. Since the last time they talked about the dream, Roland felt that Anna had become more proactive in this aspect. She would also work hard to learn some new skills, but compared to the knowledge in books, her progress in this area was much slower. Looking at Anna's clumsy and serious expression was a completely new experience for him. The visual enjoyment even surpassed the sensory experience, and a sense of superiority welled up in him. Of course, after the pleasure, there was always a time to tell stories. Sniffing Anna's fragrance, Roland told her the new news brought by the Tequila Witches, as well as his speculation about the Battle of Divine Will. Although I knew that we were only in a corner of the continent, I didn't expect that there was a civilization that was completely different from ours under the mountains. This world is really full of unknowns. Anna sighed. Maybe one day, we can also set foot on that faraway land and see what kind of secrets are hidden in the world across the sea. There will definitely be such a day, I promise, Roland replied with a smile. Even if they couldn't travel by sea, they could still fly over and use binoculars to see the land, so it wouldn't be too far. Once they had the internal combustion engine, large airships would have a place to use. But, is there really a god in this world? Leaving behind a relic that urges us to kill each other. Maybe it's watching us from somewhere. Are you afraid? Roland could not help but tighten his arms and pull her closer, No, I have to thank it. Why? He was slightly stunned. Because it sent you to me, Anna raised her head and said softly. Roland saw the rippling blue light in her eyes. It was her undisguised feelings. He felt a surge of warmth in his heart. I will always be with you. But you can't always be by my side. Before he could finish his sentence, Anna covered his mouth. You're the king and the future commander of the demon army. How can you stay in Neverwinter all the time? I can't occupy all of you for my own selfish desires. The soldiers fighting on the front lines need to see your figure, and the people of other cities also hope that you can be with them. She said softly, Roland, I'm already very satisfied to be able to listen to your stories like this. Roland was silent for a moment. You're right, but no matter where I am in the future, you'll be able to hear my stories. I can guarantee that. Anna blinked as if she understood what he meant. Not relying on the sigil of listening? That's right, he nodded. If the words of love between two people had to be conveyed through the sigil of listening, then how could they be spoken? How do I do it? You'll know tomorrow. Roland turned over and pressed Anna under his body, then kissed her neck. Then slid down from her neck to her collarbone, leaving a shallow mark on her fair and tight skin. But now it's my turn. The two of them kissed again, and the sound of their sweet breaths echoed for a long time. After breakfast the next day, Roland walked into the backyard of North Slope Mountain with Anna in high spirits. Good morning, Your Majesty. Lucia, who had come earlier, put down her work and bowed to him. Good morning, Your Majesty. Good morning, Sister Anna. Sister Nightingale. Belle also imitated her sister, bowing cheerfully and shouting. Roland smiled and waved his hand, indicating that they did not need to be so polite. He then walked to the workbench, took out a piece of white paper, and started drawing a design. He intended to take advantage of the time when the tequila survivors had not migrated to the western region to fulfill the promise he made last night. A communication tool that did not require magic power to communicate with Anna at any time. That was the wired phone. The principle of the telephone was very simple, but it was the most basic application of the electromagnetic induction phenomenon. Sound waves caused the metal reed in the microphone to vibrate, causing it to change the magnetic flux in the magnetic field, and finally produced an induced current that fluctuated between large and small. The receiver, on the other hand, used the electromagnetic coil to produce a magnetic force that fluctuated between large and small, causing the diaphragm to vibrate and restore the current to sound. In other words, it was essentially the same as an electric motor, except that the latter turned vibration into rotation and the power was much greater. When he explained his idea and design plan, Anna immediately understood how this unprecedented communication tool worked. I'll call Mystery Moon and Soroya over. Her eyes lit up. Electric current and sound exchange? Nightingale was still confused after hearing this. She looked at Lucia as if she was looking for a sense of identity, but found that Lucia was lost in thought. Electricity and magnetism coexist, and magnetism is converted into force. I see. Even the little girl Belle exclaimed, Sister, are you talking about the second chapter of elementary physics? Nightingale was immediately shocked. She held a piece of dried fish in her mouth, turned around, and disappeared into the mist. Looking at this scene, Roland could not help but laugh. Having said that, it was not so easy to make a practical telephone. The problem lay in the signal transmission. Electric signals would be attenuated. This was why the telephone was not put into use on a large scale after it was developed in the early years. Once the distance was too long, it was difficult for the other side to hear what was said. It was not until people discovered the vacuum tube that could amplify electric signals that it quickly became popular. Electricity was not Roland's strong point. The books he wrote at the beginning basically did not touch on this aspect. Now, even with the help of the dream world, it was still quite troublesome for him to make the vacuum tube. Since he did not intend to amplify the signal, he could only start by reducing the attenuation. For example, increasing the size of the wire and reducing the route loss. The former was very easy to achieve. Anna's Blackfire could precisely process the required copper wire. According to the information in her memory, using a wire with a diameter of 4 millimeters could maintain a non-repeater communication for about 50 to 60 kilometers, while the general telephone wire was only 0.4 to 0.6 millimeters. Although it was somewhat wasteful to do so, it could effectively avoid the trouble of signal amplification. Chapter 744. Together, they should be able to make a non-repeater communication range of about 100 kilometers, which could basically cover most of the residential areas in the western region. It would also allow Neverwinter to know the situation of the impassable mountain range defense line at any time. If they wanted to extend the range, they would have to use a signal amplification device. The reason why Roland chose to use a landline phone was not only that Anna's words had aroused his ambition, but also that the telephone itself was indeed a very versatile tool. Whether it was to control the political situation, strengthen the centralization of power, or help in commanding a war, it was of great significance. Another more important point was that the current industrial projects in Neverwinter had reached a saturation point. The new immigrants needed to go through primary education before they could be absorbed. The 4 giant industries, civil construction, mineral smelting, mechanical processing, and chemical production, had already occupied more than 90% of the qualified workers. Judging from their size and estimated scale, it would not be difficult for them to swallow up the 60,000 to 70,000 new immigrants in the western region. Since these industries were closely related to the future war, no one could suffer but the 4 giants. The most typical example was the bicycle factory, which Roland had built in high spirits at the beginning, but the number of bicycles produced so far was not even enough for the first army. When there was a shortage of power, it would be the first to shut down. When there was a shortage of manpower, all the workers had to go to the steam engine factory to work overtime, which could be said to be a difficult life. Even after the Kingdom Avenue and Route 67 were built, the roads were basically filled with horse-drawn carriages from the Longsong area or other cities, because the border area did not raise horses, nor did it have supporting facilities such as stables. Even though the railway had begun to be laid, the scene of citizens happily riding bicycles between the two places still did not appear. Of course, Roland would never admit to Berev that it was his mistake. But now, when he was considering new facilities, he would first take into account the production potential of Neverwinter. The telephone happened to be a good tool that didn't require any production potential, and it didn't require manual maintenance. First of all, it would not be put into the civilian market. Whether it was for military communication or to connect the border area and the Longsong area, Roland only planned to use a one-to-one method to lay the cable. In this way, the wiring process could be saved, and there was no need to set up a complicated network. Second, the small number of telephones meant that Anna, Mystery Moon, and Soroya could make them in their spare time, and there was almost no need to use the city's production capacity. It wouldn't be too late to develop civilian communications after the electron tube was invented. Therefore, the wired phone was the most suitable project to research before the tequila survivors explored the Great Snow Mountain. The development of the telephone prototype was smoother than Roland had expected. In the afternoon, 2 simple magnetic telephones appeared in the backyard of North Slope Mountain. It didn't have a shell and looked like a combination of naked coils and magnets. It was equipped with a hand-cranked motor and a magnetic induction battery, Mini Dawn. Since he didn't need a lot of power, the finger-thick magnetic battery could last for at least a month, so he didn't plan to work on a dry battery alone for the time being. How do I use this? Mystery Moon asked curiously. Is my ability really so magical? Roland automatically ignored the latter half of the other party's sentence. It's very simple. Look carefully, this hand-cranked motor is responsible for the call signal. When the user shakes it, he grabbed the handle and turned it hard, and the magnetic bell on the other end suddenly made a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. At this time, it means that there is a call. Then he winked at Anna, who nodded and picked up the handset and the microphone. When the handset leaves the base, the switch pops up, which means that the voice line is connected, and then we can talk. The electric current for the transmission of the electric signal is provided by the Mini Dawn, so without Mystery Moon's copper rod, the phone can only ring but not transmit sound. Sit. Mystery Moon stuck out her flat chest and nodded hard twice. Your Majesty, can I try to use it to speak? Soroya asked eagerly. Me too. Belle raised her hand high. Of course, no problem. As its creator, you are naturally qualified to be the first to experience this epic-making communication tool, Roland said with a smile. There was no need to explain the significance of the telephone. It had completely changed human communication habits and closely connected the distant world. It was not an exaggeration to praise it too much. But the yard is so short, and the signal will hardly be attenuated. Just connect it with ordinary copper wire. Therefore, in this quiet place surrounded by the white forest, the crisp sound of the bell rang continuously. They could have talked directly, but everyone insisted on starting from scratch, starting from the handheld flashlight. There's really a sound. It sounds like Lucia's. What should I say? Let her guess who you are. Separated by the wall, the witches scrambled to shout into the microphone. For a moment, the sound of laughter echoed from both ends of the yard. Roland also tried it twice. To be honest, the prototype was not ideal. The sound was sometimes loud and sometimes soft, and there was a lot of noise. It could not be regarded as a qualified finished product. But he knew that the next step was to repeatedly adjust the size of the reed and the distance between the electromagnets to reach the best quality. Not long after, the handset was passed to Roland again. He smiled and shook his head, put the handset to his ear, and habitually said, "Hello." But there was no reply except for the faint sound of the electric current. Almost as if their hearts were connected, he subconsciously guessed the person on the other side of the phone. "Anna?" Roland said softly. After a while, a slightly distorted answer came from the other side. "I like you, Roland." After a day of protection, Nightingale went back to her bedroom, a little depressed. This was not the first time she felt like she did not understand anything. Every time this happened, the only thing that could comfort her was dried fish and ice cream bread. Well, now there was one more chaos drink. Seeing the intimacy between Roland and Anna, she felt a heartfelt envy, as well as a faint sense of sadness. She thought she would get used to it sooner or later, but the process was harder than she thought. The deeper the relationship, the longer the thorns would be. She now somewhat understood the meaning of Wendy's words. Walking to the table, Nightingale opened the drawer, but found that the bottle was empty. Did she take the wrong one? She opened the other drawer, and there was still an empty bottle. "Wendy? My chaos drink." As soon as Nightingale turned around, she was hugged by her roommate. That proud chest almost made her breathless. "Nightingale, how long have we known each other? Ever since you left the Quinn family in Silver City, we've been together, right?" "Yes, it's been almost 4 or 5 years, but my chaos drink, we've experienced so many dangers and hardships along the way to get to where we are today. Nothing can destroy the friendship between us, right? Of course, I've always treated you as half a sister. But my chaos drink, I finished your drink, sorry." Wendy hugged her tighter. "I'll make it up to you next month." "What? Finished it?" Nightingale touched the empty bag of dried fish. The only thing that could comfort her was dried fish, ice cream bread, and chaos drink. Now it was all gone. She heard a cracking sound in her heart. Chapter 745. When Iron Axe closed his eyes, he could feel the smell of yellow sand surrounding him. It was the 4th day since he entered the desert and the 3rd week since the first army left Neverwinter. At the end of this week, 2/3 of the winter would be over and the coldest period would be late winter. However, compared to the snowy western region of Grey Castle, this place was much less affected by the months of demons. Although the sky was always gray, at least there was no biting north wind or ice and snow that could freeze the whole desert. Since Silverstream did not converge with any river and most of the water flowed underground, the army could only move forward on foot. Iron Axe did not act according to the original plan, which was to wait for the 500 new recruits stationed in Steep Cliff City to be ready to march, and then mix them into the main force and move together. Instead, he left them to Brian and went ahead himself, striving to reach Iron Sand City as soon as possible. The new recruits might be able to stand still and pull the trigger, but marching on foot would only make them die in the desert. Even if there were 500 more people, they would not be of much help to the situation. Iron Axe knew that to achieve His Majesty's goal, they could not rely on artillery. The First Army was the capital to ensure the fruits of victory, not a means to conquer the Sand Nation. The Majans had a set of traditional solutions. As for the 500 new recruits, they only needed to occupy the Silver Stream Oasis and ensure that the vanguard troops would not be attacked from both sides. In the southernmost region, the oasis was a lifeline. No matter if they attacked or fled, they could not leave the oasis. Facing the neatly marching veterans, the Sand Nation tribes could feel the power from them even though they had never seen the power of guns. Along the way, no one stood up to question the army from Grey Castle. Only when they filled their water sacks and replenished their food supplies did the Sand Nation people whisper behind their backs. At this speed, the First Army should be able to reach Iron Sand City before nightfall. I don't quite understand. Can the so-called holy duel take place at any time in any season? A beautiful blonde woman walked to Echo's side. Her fair skin formed a sharp contrast with the Osha clan princess. Even if it's an honor challenge between aristocrats, it's also allowed to refuse. After all, everyone has times when they're not in their best condition. In such cold weather, who wouldn't want to come out and fight all day and sleep by a warm stove? What I mean is, what if they don't agree to the holy duel? Iron Axe remembered that her name was Andrea, a combat witch who often followed Her Highness Tilly. According to His Majesty, Ashes, a mortal, was supposed to be the only foreign aide, but for some reason, she also came. When someone rushes into your house with an axe and kicks over your stove, you won't be able to do anything even if you don't want to. Ashes curled her lips. Do you think that this kind of contest that determines the life and death of a family will follow the hypocritical rules of the nobles? That's called a sneak attack or a massacre, not a duel, Andrea said disdainfully. Even if the Majans are barbarians, they should be able to distinguish this. Do you think everyone is as ignorant and incompetent as you? To say this in front of Huyin, you really are a knowledgeable person. Don't misinterpret what I mean. Iron Axe did not care about the barbarians. His Majesty had told him that Border Town did not care about one's family background. Compared to the Majans, he had a more important identity, which was that he was a resident of Neverwinter. When Huyin looked at him for help, he coughed twice and took the initiative to explain, "Miss Andrea, you're not worrying too much. Although the holy duel can't be refused and both parties must be well prepared to be recognized by the three gods, a duel can't be started at will. First of all, the challenger must be qualified for the duel." What kind of qualification? First of all, it must be a complete Majin clan. Iron Axe briefly explained, one person can't represent a clan, even if he's the chief or the princess. This rule was made to prevent the victors from occupying 1/6 of the territory of Iron Sand City with only a dozen or so people. In addition, it also excludes foreigners from the scope of the duel. Iron Sand City allows foreigners to fight on behalf of the clan, but it doesn't allow them to occupy the core power. Doesn't that mean we're not qualified at all? Ashes raised her eyebrows and said, Queen has been exiled for several years and the Osha clan no longer exists. Or should we start by looking for her surviving clansmen? No one can survive in the Endless Cape. Iron Axe shook his head and said, but we can try another way. For example, let Lady Silvermoon become the chief of a new clan. That's possible? Andrea was stunned. The Majans don't value bloodlines as much as you do. Compared with bloodline inheritance, strength is the most important thing. The commander-in-chief of the First Army said calmly, after the first condition is met, the clans that can stand firm in the small oases around Iron Sand City will be qualified for the duel. There are a total of 4 small oases, and the newly rising clans will usually fight around them. There are no rules or restrictions, so these 4 small oases are also called the Bloodstained Land. They're equivalent to admission tickets, right? Ashes said indifferently. You can think of it that way. In fact, these clans are generally divided into 2 categories. Iron Axe paused and said, challengers and watchdogs. Watchdogs? The golden-haired witch asked curiously. They're the obstacles set up by the top clans who don't want to see the order of Iron Sand City change greatly. This time it was Echo who answered her. With their huge resources and influence, they recruit a large number of warriors to form a mixed clan and take root in the small oases. Watchdogs don't challenge their masters to the Divine Saint duel, but they occupy the position of challenger. Although they can't enter Iron Sand City, they can live well with the water and food provided by the small oases. It sounds no different from a hound that is willing to gnaw on leftovers, Ashes sneered. This description is actually quite appropriate. Because the holy duel is full of variables, the big clans will try to win over or bribe the potential challengers stationed in the blood-stained land. At that time, my father didn't want to be a watchdog and insisted on the holy duel with the Iron Whip clan, but in the end, Echo's voice trailed off, obviously thinking of something sad. They'll pay for their treacherous behavior, Lady Silvermoon, Iron Axe comforted her. Now, death is not far away from them. So we have to find a challenger first, let Echo take over the position of chief, and then challenge the 6 big clans to a duel? Andrea asked. Chapter 746. Thuram's favorite thing to do was to sit on the second floor of the tavern and enjoy the endless flow of customers downstairs. This was his tavern and his territory, so Thuram named it the Skull Wine Cup according to his own preference and redecorated it. He also hung a series of incomplete skulls at the entrance as a sign of the tavern. Even though 5 years ago, it wasn't called that. What was it called at that time? Fairy Forest. Or Fairy Garden. Anyway, it was not important anymore. Thuram took a sip of the strong wine filled with fire lantern fruit and let the hot taste fill his tongue. Such a weak name was not suitable for the blood-stained land. There were no fairies or fairies here, but there were as many bones as one wanted. After every battle, there would be a pile of corpses left on the outskirts of Iron Sand City. Compared with the easily rotten flesh, he preferred the bones buried in hot sand, especially the skulls. First of all, it could intimidate those who came to drink and make trouble and let them know what kind of place this was. Second, it could really hold wine, so he could buy fewer wine cups. After all, the former did not work for everyone. There were always some idiots born with deformed brains who thought that everywhere was like their own backyard and their opponents were no different from crying women. Fragile crockery and glass were not ideal containers in a place where troublemakers often roamed about. Thuram had developed a habit in recent years to look at each customer. The people who came and went could generally be divided into 3 categories: the half-dead, the moribund, and the dead. Compared with their identities, he preferred to distinguish them in this way. The half-dead came for a very simple purpose: drinking, gambling, and playing with women. As long as they maintained their current behavior, they could basically finish the remaining half of the journey. Most of the moribund were watchdogs or challengers who came to inquire about the situation. They had already put their heads under the sword and might move away at any time. As for the dead, they were, of course, the troublemakers. Thuram's main target of observation was neither the half-dead nor the dead, because the former was boring and the latter could only bring a little joy when they were dead. He liked to look at the moribund the most. In them, Thuram could see himself when he was young. At that time, he was just like them, holding a sharp knife in his hand, in the blood-stained land envied by many clans, but his eyes were always looking at the Iron Sand City from afar. As he waited, his courage, hot-bloodedness, and strength left him bit by bit until someone took his place and became the new master of the little oasis. He wagged his tail and begged for mercy to survive, becoming a part of the blood-stained lands. In the end, he turned from a dead to a half-dead. Even if one's life was placed under the blade of a knife, it was still possible for the dying to soar into the sky, like breaking out of a cocoon and spreading its wings, rising from the ashes. On the other hand, the half-dead would never have this opportunity. They could only find some entertainment as a form of comfort in the latter half of their lives. For example, passers-by who admired these oases, or died in the yellow sand, or became the new master of this place. At this moment, a subordinate pushed open the door and walked in, whispering a few words in his ear. "Oh, are you sure you didn't mishear? Thuram was startled. That's what he said, and from the appearance of the woman beside him, it's very likely that she's a goddess. Thuram pondered for a moment before revealing a malicious smile. Bring them in. Remember to put away your weapons. This guy isn't easy to deal with. Look, now there's a big fun coming to the door. There were 2 visitors. Although their bodies were hidden under loose robes, he could still see that they were a man and a woman. When the tall man took off his hood and revealed his face in front of him, Thuram could not help narrowing his eyes. I didn't expect to see you again, Iron Axe. There are more things you can't imagine than the stars reflected in the oasis. There's nothing strange about it. Iron Axe first helped the woman sit down, and then calmly sat opposite him. But at this moment, you should know why I came. Probably. Thuram shrugged. As an old Sand Nation, he was familiar with every holy duel in the Land of Fire. Some of the dying could rise from the ashes, but most of the dying had become completely dead. The Osha clan was one of them. Although he heard that some accidents happened during the duel, the result would not change. It's just that you shouldn't have come back. The Iron Whip clan is no longer what it used to be. As a mixed-blood warrior of some renown, he had once thought of recruiting him. Even though he had become a subordinate of the Watchdog, his initial ambition had not been completely extinguished. He imagined that one day, the clan could once again occupy the small oasis, and then take a step further and walk onto the sacred dueling ground. However, that was several years ago. As for now, he just wanted to have some fun. Really? That's exactly what I wanted, Iron Axe said disapprovingly. I was worried that they had been driven out of Iron Sand City by other challengers and died in some corner. Now it seems that the 3 gods haven't completely fallen asleep yet. Thuram frowned. In his impression, the mixed-blood warrior was not a person who talked big. I understand your desire for revenge, but without the strength to match, it's tantamount to courting death. At this point, he looked at the silent woman. Even if the Osha clan has a divine lady, it's still difficult to reverse the gap between you and the Iron Whip clan. Most of the exiles are already dead. What can the 2 of you do? That's why I came to you, Thuram. Iron Axe's expression was very natural, but his words made Thuram's heart skip a beat. Is your clan still in this oasis? 8 years ago, you and the Osha clan were also challengers. You clearly had the opportunity to enter Iron Sand City, but in the end, you became a watchdog and later, you were not even a watchdog. Seeing your clansmen become slaves of other clans, didn't you feel a trace of remorse? Now, a new opportunity is in front of you. Swear allegiance to Lady Drow Silvermoon, and you can touch the wall of Iron Sand City again. After being stunned for a while, Thuram finally laughed. Ha ha. This was indeed a rare entertainment. There was nothing more interesting than watching a crazy Avenger walking towards destruction. But he did not expect that Iron Axe would try to divert the fun to him. So you want this little girl to become the new chief of the clan, and then launch a sacred duel? Even her father is just an equal to me, but now you want me to worship her as my master? Maybe you found some good helpers and can play some tricks in the duel, but what good will it do me? Gather the slaves, fight with the watchdogs, and then send you to Iron Sand City? Chapter 747. However, Iron Axe did not fly into a rage as Thuram had expected. In fact, it was difficult to see any change in his expression, which made Thuram slightly surprised. In the past, this mixed blood would never allow anyone to threaten the Princess of Osha, not even verbally. He could not help but turn his head to look at Drow Silvermoon and found that the Divine Lady did not react either, as if she did not care about her own safety. What on earth are they thinking? Thuram touched the god's stone of retaliation in his bosom, and the fierce expression on his face inevitably became a little stiff. In fact, I didn't expect you to defeat the watchdog. You didn't fight 8 years ago, so I know how bold you are. At least, you're much more timid than you are, Iron Axe said slowly. And this time, I didn't come back just for revenge against the Iron Whip clan. The first half of Iron Axe's words touched his sore spot, but the second half made him slightly startled. Not just for revenge? I will challenge the 6 clans and make Osha the leader of the clans, Iron Axe said word by word. Although the clans of Iron Sand City jointly managed this oasis, there was still a difference in status between clans. It was a matter of course that the strongest had the best area in the city. To climb to this position, one had to challenge the clans ranked at the top. For Osha, who had nothing, naturally, they had to defeat all 6 clans in order to occupy the core area of Iron Sand City. This was an idea only a madman would have. The road to the top could not be interrupted. The physical exhaustion of fighting 6 battles in a row was enough to make people desperate, not to mention facing the first-class Majin warriors. Generally speaking, after a holy duel, the warriors of the clan needed more than half a year to recover. As for those who had died in the battle, they had to be trained or recruited again. In other words, the more resources they had, the stronger their foundation. Wild Flame, the leader of the clans, had not given up the first position for decades. The Avenger is a difficult breed to categorize. Some of them rose to the sky, some lost everything. As for those who hesitated or simply gave up during the preparation process, there were many who hesitated or simply gave up. Therefore, they could be half dead, or dead. But there was no doubt that the madman would be the last. There was nothing to talk about. Thuram found that even his interest in having fun had disappeared. Revenge against the Iron Whip could be said to be overestimating one's own strength, but to become the enemy of the entire Iron Sand City? Just the thought of this news made him restless. In order to avoid getting himself into trouble, he shouted, "Kids, catch this guy, along with the woman." There were a total of 4 clansmen in the room, plus the 2 guards outside the door, all with sharp blades and god stones. Even if Iron Axe was strong, it would be impossible for him to escape in a battle of 6 against 2. In addition, their weapons had already been taken away before they entered. If he killed the mixed bloods and handed over the Osha descendants to the Iron Whip clan, he should be able to get a lot of rewards. He thought that maybe he could become the watchdog of this small oasis again. Just then, the Osha princess also stood up. She let out a sarcastic chuckle, then lifted her hood and removed the thin veil on her face. Her black hair was loose and beautiful. Her subordinate was right. She was indeed a divine lady, but not the Drow Silvermoon that Thuram was familiar with. No Sand Nation woman could have skin as white as snow as hers. His long black hair spread out like a waterfall, and his golden eyes shone with a dangerous light. Thuram opened his mouth, but before he could finish his words, the woman had already easily dodged the incoming slash and punched one of her clansmen in the face. The black-haired goddess did not use any weapons, but her fists were more powerful than iron hammers. With a muffled sound, the clansman who was hit was sent flying, smashing through the wooden wall and falling from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor. When he asked this question, the 2nd person also made a hole in the wall. The tavern was in an uproar. The cold wind rushed in, making the fire flicker. The divine lady did not stop. Every move she made seemed to be dancing with the wind, but the shadow magnified by the firelight sent a chill down Thuram's spine. Shouldn't they all be wearing God's stones of retaliation? This kind of gemstone bought at a high price from the kingdom of Greycastle should give ordinary people a chance to fight against the divine lady, but why did it seem to be nothing in front of her? The 4th clansman also fell, vomiting blood. The divine lady went around to his back and kicked his spine, almost breaking his body in half. Even the diving force of a 4-winged eagle would not be as strong as this. No one could survive 1 round in front of her. After a few breaths, only Iron Axe, the divine lady, and Thuram were left in the room. "Come over here. Someone is making trouble on the 2nd floor of the tavern. Where's the chief? Damn it. How did you guard the door? A guest was smashed to death." Hurried footsteps came from the staircase. Apparently, many people were rushing to the chief's room, but the tip of a long knife was already at Thuram's neck. Don't come in." A layer of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Ignoring the stinging pain of the knife cutting through his skin, he shouted toward the door. "Get out of here, all of you." Thuram sadly found that Iron Axe was right. He was indeed much more timid than he was arrogant. Faced with the threat of death, the first thing he thought of was to compromise rather than fight back. Perhaps from the very beginning, he was not a dying man with the hope of resurrection, but a half-dead man who was overcautious and indecisive. "Can we have a talk now?" Iron Axe's tone did not change much. "What's the use of my promise? The watchdogs here are supported by the Iron Whip clan and the Cutbone clan. Do you think you can hide such a big commotion from them? Tomorrow, Iron Sand City will know the news." Thurum growled. "And I can't even gather all my clansmen in such a short time. Most of them have become slaves of other clans. Even if they're willing to come back, they can't stop the warriors trained by the big clans. If you don't want to die without a burial place, it's not too late to escape from the oasis. As I said before, I don't expect you to defeat the watchdogs." Thurum gritted his teeth. What did Iron Axe mean? If he really had such great strength, he could have directly become a challenger. Why did he do this? Unless the force behind him was not from the southernmost region. As soon as this idea came to his mind, the old chief felt a sense of fear rising from the bottom of his heart. Was that why the other party needed to use the clan's name to initiate a holy duel? Suddenly, two muffled thunders came from outside the window. The sound was not loud and seemed to come from a very far place. Strangely, Thurum did not see the lightning that cut through the night sky. Normally, it should have come earlier than the thunder. At the same time, Iron Axe's expression finally changed. Chapter 748. The light of the explosion flashed like a firefly in the night sky. Vanner raised his telescope and looked at the oasis in the distance. The twinkling torches became the best indicator of the target. The closer they were to Iron Sand City, the more torches there were. Thousands of leaping torches outlined the camp of the Sand Nation, which was also the main target of the artillery battalion. After a while, a rumble came from the depths of the oasis. "The landing point seems to be a bit off," muttered Cat's Claw, who was also observing. "There's nothing we can do. It's not easy to set up the cannons in the sand, so we can only use the first few shots as test shots." Jop took advantage of the conversation to load the next shell into the barrel. "Anyway, let's hit further away. If it falls on Sir Iron Axe's head, we'll all be finished. Don't worry, the tavern is far away from the camp. If we can hit it, the shooting manuals compiled by the sages will have to be rewritten." Rodney pulled the firing rope and said, "Ready." "Fire." Vanner nodded. The two Longsong cannons once again produced a deafening roar. The flames spurted from the muzzles briefly illuminated the ground in front of them. The raised sand and dust slapped on their faces, causing them to involuntarily squint their eyes. The small oasis mentioned by the Sand Nation could not be regarded as a real town. It was just a camp formed by the clans outside Iron Sand City. None of the houses were made of bricks. Except for a few low-rise buildings and sentry towers made of wood, most of the rest were tents made of leather and cloth. Therefore, the killing effect of the Longsong cannons was surprisingly good. Vanner noticed that no matter where the shell fell, the surroundings would instantly darken, but soon light up again. The former was caused by the blast of the explosion, which overturned the tents and torches, while the latter was caused by the mixture of torch grease and flammable building materials, which formed a more dazzling pillar of fire. This was the first time that the artillery battalion of the First Army had used predistance measurement to arrange the artillery position according to the firing table. The result was not very ideal, but fortunately, the fragile and flammable targets more or less made up for this shortcoming. After several rounds of bombardment, the camp of the Sand Nation had already been set ablaze. Several balls of bright flames were spreading outwards, and with the help of the whistling night wind, it looked like the entire oasis was going to be set ablaze. Although he could not experience the shock brought by the bombardment at close range, Vanner could completely imagine what kind of predicament these so-called watchdogs were currently in. Unstoppable and unavoidable. This was the god of war that His Majesty had mentioned. Praise the cannon. Praise the large-caliber cannon. He proudly glanced at the gun battalion and machine gun squads lying in ambush in front of the camp, and once again rejoiced that he had made the right choice. In the future, the war would be dominated by the cannons. As for the flintlock, it would only be used to cover up the gaps and clean up the battlefield. It took Thuram quite a while to recover from the earth-shattering explosion. His ears were still ringing as if someone had slapped him in the face. Is that the thunder that Iron Axe mentioned? After the low thunder and sharp whistling sound, a sentry tower not far from the tavern was suddenly engulfed by a fireball, and the entire tower was instantly torn apart. At the same time, the violent explosion in his ears made him temporarily lose his hearing. Through the holes in the wall, he could see that many tents had been ignited by the splashing bonfire debris and soon became bigger bonfires. People screamed and ran out of the bonfires, fell to the ground and struggled, trying to put out the flames on their bodies. Unfortunately, only a few lucky people could do this. Some of the Sand Nation people near the sentry tower collapsed on the ground. Although they did not seem to have suffered any serious injuries, they could not stand up again. Damn it, this is not thunder at all. It's simply a heavenly fire that fell to the mortal world. Only Father God in the sky could have such terrible means. Thuram had thought that such a fierce attack would not last long, but he soon found that he was wrong. The thunder would be heard every quarter or so, followed by the fireballs and explosions. He also noticed that the fireballs were scattered at first, but it did not take long for them to gradually gather at the center of the oasis, where the watchdogs gathered. Compared with the vassal clans, the watchdogs naturally occupied the most fertile territory in the oasis. However, at this moment, it had become a hell. Columns of fire rose up, as if the sky was burning. The way he looked at Iron Axe had completely changed. By the three gods, this is not the power you should have. Thuram said in a hoarse and trembling voice, "Who did you seek refuge with? Those northerners?" "A benevolent king," Iron Axe replied, "who will bring the oasis and order to the Mojin Sand Nation." This can't be. Thuram subconsciously wanted to say the word impossible, but when he saw the spreading sea of fire in the oasis, the last syllable seemed to be stuck in his throat and could not be uttered. Unfortunately, not everyone will be willing to accept such order. The oasis breeds the Sand Nation, but it also imprisons their thoughts. Killing and framing are all because of the struggle for survival, but the oasis that breeds life is soaked in blood. I have to say that it's ironic. As for the watchdogs, which are obviously used to maintain the power of the big clans and let the clansmen suffer in the yellow sand and dry land, it's even more stupid and short-sighted. I wouldn't be surprised if these words came from the northerners, but Iron Axe. Thuram shook his head with difficulty. You're obviously a mixed blood born in the desert. How can you have such a naive idea? It's impossible that you don't know that if we don't kill and plunder, the limited oasis can't accommodate our growing population. Unless the Mojins have the power to overwhelm Grey Castle, it's impossible for them to break out of this desert. Cooperation and allegiance will only lead to death. The Northerners will never really trust us. The Blackbone clan and the Sandstone clan are the best proof. For a fertile territory, the two clans that had the opportunity to settle in Iron Sand City turned to the Queen of Clearwater, Garcia. But what was the result? It was said that all of them were fed a strange pill, and in the end, they turned into rotten flesh and blood. The land promised to them as a reward became empty words in the end. There's no real trust? Iron Axe showed a trace of emotion. I thought so at first. But the fact tells me that there are always some people who are born to break the rules. Suddenly, there was a rapid sound of hooves outside the tavern, and it became more and more frequent. Thuram did not need to look to know that it was the Watchdogs' counterattack team gathering. They may have lost the courage to advance, but they did not lose their skills and horsemanship. As long as the enemy appeared near the oasis, they would pounce on the target like bloodthirsty sandworms. When he was about to warn Iron Axe grabbed his collar and pulled him to the window. Not far away, he saw more jumping torches running toward the desert outside the oasis. It seemed that this group of watchdogs had already smelled the scent of their opponents. However, both Iron Axe and the black-haired divine lady looked particularly at ease, as if they did not care about this cavalry team at all. Chapter 749. Night was not a good time to fight. Neither the sun nor the moon could be seen in the months of demons. The dim, cold light shone on the uneven desert. The side facing the light could still vaguely see the outline of the desert, but the side facing the light could not even see the fingers of one's hand. Therefore, torches were indispensable for both offense and defense. When scattered sparks appeared in the direction of the oasis, Danny carefully wiped a clip clean, then inserted it into the loading port, pulled the bolt, and loaded the gun. "The enemy is coming. Watch out." "I can see it." He first imitated the Malt's voice and then answered to himself. In this way, it was as if Malt was still with him, acting as a protector and fighting side by side with him, even though he was no longer a member of the precision shooting team. Danny returned to the gun camp after his confinement, but Brian soon found him and brought him a brand new gun. It was the one he was holding in his hand. Although it looked no different from the bolt guns used by the precision shooting team, Danny realized that it was not an ordinary gun as soon as he held it in his hand. It was like a long sword with a similar shape, but some were just casually made by blacksmiths for practice, while some were precious swords that could cut a hair. The metal part of the gun gave off a unique dim light, and its surface was as smooth as a young girl's skin. All the joints were so smooth that they seemed to be carved by a knife or an axe. It felt natural and did not sting at all. What surprised Danny the most was that a monocular telescope could be installed on the top of the gun. The surface of the telescope was engraved with two straight intersecting lines, and the center of the lines was where the bullets would land. He did not know how this was achieved, but through the telescope, the blurry and small long-distance targets became much clearer, which, in a sense, extended the shooting range of the gun. The subsequent shooting training also proved his feeling. The shooting accuracy of this new gun was much higher than that of the common bolt guns. In windless or breezy conditions, he was 90% sure that he could hit the head of a human-shaped target within 500 meters. Danny was so touched that he almost shed tears on the spot when he learned that this weapon was specially made for him by His Majesty. Although he had made a disciplinary mistake, His Majesty had not given up on him and had given him the right to freely choose his firing position in the position. There was no other way for him to treat His Majesty than to kill himself. However, when Brian asked him if he had any protectors he wanted to pick, Danny rejected him without hesitation. He already had his own protector. This gun. Emalt. More and more flames appeared in their field of vision, like stars reflected in the sea of sand. This was within the commander's expectations. Before every battle, the superiors would explain the battle intent and objectives in detail to each platoon so that they would know how far the battle would end. For example, the bonfires on the cannons and the firing rate of once every 7 minutes were all to lure the enemy to launch a counterattack, thereby weakening the combatants of the Watchdog clan as much as possible in preparation for the general attack after dawn. The brightly lit position would allow the enemy to notice any abnormalities, and controlling the firing rate would prevent the rapid and fierce bombardment from directly scattering the enemy. Of course, Danny knew that the artillery battalion could not do that. They looked down on others all day long, but they did not know how much resources they occupied. The firearms and ammunition carried by the gun battalion could be carried by one soldier, but what about the artillery battalion? Without the help of the witch named Hummingbird, they could not even transport food into the desert. There were more than a dozen carriages, and more than half of them were loaded with artillery shells and machine gun ammunition. Only 2 howitzers could be placed in such a large wooden box. If they were to fight as they did in the drill, the 2 Longsong cannons would be able to use up all the ammunition they carried in less than an hour. What would happen after that? They could only watch helplessly. Although Danny admitted that the drill showed unparalleled power, he always felt that every shot was like a golden dragon. However, those people regarded this power as their own. They were simply too arrogant. Without the support of His Majesty's rich treasury, they could only eat dirt in front of the gun battalion. Therefore, the fear of scattering the enemy was just a nice-sounding excuse. Ultimately, they wanted to keep some stocks in case of accidents. After all, it would take a week or 2 for the new recruits to open the Oasis supply line and deliver new ammunition. When the first group of Firelight entered the ambush circle of the First Army, Danny put the cross-shaped telescope in front of his eyes. Wind direction: to the north, strong. Target: about 700 meters away. Thank you. You're welcome, he murmured and put his finger on the trigger. Considering that the accuracy of fighting at night would be greatly reduced, he did not leave the position too far this time and chose to shoot head-on. In this way, even if the enemy rode fast on horses, they would not be able to move too far in his field of vision. The Sand Nation was indeed a barbarian tribe that was good at fighting on horseback. At first, there were only scattered firelight, but when they charged, they had already formed a neat front line. The horses' hooves sounded in unison, like a gradually accelerating drum beat. At the same time, they dropped the torches in their hands and pulled out their dull sabers. At this distance, the intermittent roars of the artillery position were the most eye-catching target. The backlit sand dunes on both sides suddenly flashed with continuous light spots. Tut, 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 tut. The crisp sound of machine guns blended with the charging drum beat, announcing the official start of the ambush. Without the field artillery, the heavy machine guns became the weapon with the longest range. Bullets swept toward the charging line like a stream of water, and the desert suddenly boiled. Unexpectedly, screams, curses, and shouts broke out in the crowd. The shadows in the night seemed to move a little faster, and Danny was oblivious to it. He only focused on the first enemy that rushed forward. 500 meters, I got you. It was not easy to find a target on a moonless night. He could only vaguely distinguish the charging figure of the enemy. But this was not a shooting show, and he did not need to hit the head to score a point. Whether it was the horse or the rider, being shot in any part of the body could kill them. Danny pulled the trigger, and the gun trembled slightly. He smelled the hot smell of gunpowder. He could not see the point of the bullet, and there was no blood. The enemy just trembled and fell off the horse. This was his hunting ground, Danny thought, and this was where he should be. Did you see that, Malt? Don't get distracted. The next target is coming. Chapter 750. The darkness of the night had become a big obstacle for both sides. It turned out that the accuracy of the machine gun squad would be greatly reduced if they could not see where the bullets landed and the effect of the shooting. Although the number of machine guns used in the ambush was not as many as in the battle at Coldwind Ridge, it was not enough to completely stop the cavalry charge. When the enemy abandoned their torches, there were always dozens of people in the front line who could break through the crossfire net, howling and rushing to the artillery position, and then became Danny's targets. The enemy also could not tell where the real threat was. They could not see their companions being shot to pieces in the fire net, and they did not know what kind of weapons were set up on the sand dunes on both sides. When they realized that there were fewer and fewer people around them, it was already too late. Without the guidance of the torches, the cavalrymen who formed the new front line did not know what happened to their companions in the front. They could only see the roaring cannons and the flashing light spots on both sides. No matter how they thought about it, the thunder-like bombardment was more threatening than the sand dunes on both sides where they could not even see the shadows of people. It was in this kind of obstacle that the watchdogs did not collapse immediately. Instead, they formed multiple lines and rushed to the position like waves. In the eyes of these battle-hardened clans, the continuous charge of sharp blades was the best way to destroy the enemy's will to fight. Speed represented power. In the face of the tide-like attack, the slaves and mercenaries could not hold on for long. No matter how sturdy the front line was, once the cavalry broke in, it would not take long for them to become a pile of loose sand. This created an excellent hunting opportunity for Danny. Soon he took down his 20th prey. But at the same time, he also noticed a strange phenomenon. Several times when he aimed at the enemy in the front, there was always a bullet that hit the target before he did. It was as if someone was competing with him. If that was all, it would not be a big deal. What made Danny excited was that the shooter hiding in the night was definitely a top hunter. Because the direction of the enemy's fall was always the same. If the target was shot in the upper body, the target would fall backward. If the target was shot on the horse, the target would fall forward. Danny could not explain the specific principle, but it was most likely the case. The target falling to the side could only mean that the position of the hunter was on one side of the sand dunes. And the target was shot in the torso, not the horse. What did this mean? Not only could the enemy capture a rider galloping in the dark night, but he could also predict where the target would arrive before firing. Coupled with the unpredictable cold winds of the desert, this skill could almost be considered as divine. Was there such an expert in the army? Was it a member of the precision shooting squad, or a soldier from the firearm battalion who was selected by His Majesty and given the new bolt gun, just like himself? Danny suppressed his excitement and sped up the movements of his hands. He didn't want to lose to his opponent, especially in front of Malt. There's one left on the right, 250 meters away from the defensive line. He's mine. In the latter half of the night, the thunder gradually subsided, but Thuram never heard the cheers of the returning warriors. Even though they were caught off guard, judging from the number of torches, the watchdogs had gathered nearly 2,000 men. Regardless of victory or defeat, there had to be some news, right? But after the thunder subsided, there was no more movement in the night. Like the mouth of a giant beast from the abyss, the more than 2,000 people were all swallowed up, not even spitting out a bone. The fire in the oasis also gradually subsided. All the clansmen who came to save their master were sent to put out the fire, which was what Iron Axe had asked him to do. Thuram didn't know whether he should be happy or sad at the moment. The watchdogs had never stopped oppressing his clansmen. Even in his dreams, he imagined that one day they would meet with great misfortune, such as angering the big clans in the city, or being utterly defeated by a rising challenger. In short, the most pleasing thing for him was that the other party suffered a disaster. But the new challenger was Iron Axe. Iron Axe also intended to drag Thuram into the storm of fighting for the throne of the clan. Perhaps Thuram should persuade him to occupy the blood-stained land first, and then carefully consider his next move? The golden-eyed divine lady behind him was indeed very powerful, but the divine lady of the Wild Flame clan was also not to be trifled with. Especially as the first clan, they could choose the way of duel. In a one-on-one duel, Thuram was not optimistic about the divine lady brought by Iron Axe. Although the holy duel was known as the fairest way of competition, in fact, it was also a competition between the clans behind the duel. Not only could they set up traps before the duel, but they also might not be able to avoid the tricks of the other party in the duel. The tragic exile of the Osha clansmen was proof that only a few warriors who could fight could not guarantee the final victory. But what puzzled him the most was why the king of Grey Castle was suddenly interested in this desert. In the eyes of the northerners, this place had always been synonymous with barbarism and backwardness. They did not allow the Sand Nation to enter the kingdom's territory, nor were they willing to intervene in the disputes between clans. The only people who traveled between the two places were merchants, and their commodities were slaves. In addition, what did Iron Axe mean by bringing order and oasis? It was said that only the three gods' emissary could make oasis grow in the desert and stop the storm. In other words, the southernmost region was originally a lush land full of fragrant grass, green trees, and gurgling water. It was not until the emissary died that the land became what it was today. When the three gods sent a new emissary, the southernmost region would return to its original state. But except for that illusory rumor, no one had ever been able to realize this. Otherwise, the Sand Nation would not be fighting for water and food all day long. Just as they were waiting anxiously, a white light finally appeared on the horizon. Then, Thuram faintly heard a strange horn sound. It was not as deep and dull as the horn, but slightly sharp, as if it was repeatedly ticking. Not long after, a strange team appeared at the edge of the oasis. They lined up in an unstoppable manner and approached the blood-stained land. Then, a fierce battle broke out with the remaining watchdogs. Perhaps it was not as fierce as he had expected. A group of clan warriors raised their sabers and rushed forward. Then, after a series of crackling explosions, they all fell to the ground. The rest of the people scattered, no longer caring about their fallen companions who were moaning on the ground. After entering the oasis, they quickly took control of several sentry towers and surrounded the tavern. Thuram knew he no longer had a choice when the brown-skinned woman with bluish-gray hair walked into the room. Although it had been 7 or 8 years since they last met, he could still see some of her mother's features on her face. Chapter 751. As soon as Rebecca Bloodwhip got out of bed, he heard the news that the small oasis in the northwest had changed hands. Really? He frowned. Although he had seen the oasis on fire last night, he did not expect that the Howling clan could not even hold out for one night. Was there a new clan with such a powerful force in the Silver Stream recently? Why don't I remember anything about it? Rebecca patted his concubine lying beside him and asked her to wrap herself up in a blanket. After that, he turned to his subordinate and said, "Tell me more." According to the report of those guys who escaped, the fire in the oasis was not set by the challengers, but by Godfather's heavenly fire. Bullshit. Rebecca spat. Those cowards. Whenever they encounter something they can't solve, they blame it on the 3 gods. I'm going to hang them all at the gate of Iron Sand City. But... The subordinate hesitated for a moment. My men went to the camp in the small oasis this morning and found that the scene there was quite similar to what they described. There were many pitch-black pits on the ground, and corpses and house fragments were scattered everywhere. It didn't look like a simple arson. House fragments? Yes. It looked like a giant sandworm or an earth-drilling scorpion ran over the camp and tore them into pieces. The subordinate chose his words carefully. Most of those who stayed in the camp were unlucky, while those who had fun outside organized a counterattack. But they were defeated before they could even see their opponents. In other words, those idiots were ambushed and fled in panic before they could approach their opponents. Rebecca began to doubt whether he had been too kind to the watchdogs. He had spent a lot of effort to win them over, but this was all they could do? Or was it that a long and stable life had eroded their strength more than he had expected? And then, so far, they don't even know which clan occupied the small oasis. My men are still asking around. We should be able to get the news soon, the subordinate paused and said hesitantly, but some of the refugees said that they saw many northerners. Northerners? This news made Rebecca take it seriously. Naked, he walked to the window and looked towards the northwest. The fire had long been extinguished, leaving only a few wisps of black smoke. Although the Howling clan was the watchdog that Iron Whip and Chipped Bone had recruited, he did not really care about their lives. The Challenger system was not so much a qualification test, but rather a protective wall set up by the 6 clans for themselves. He only understood this after he settled in Iron Sand City. The Holy Duel was only a small-scale fight, but the battle for the small oasis was an all-out war between the 2 clans. It was not uncommon for both sides to fight to the death. After all, even if they did not enter the Iron Sand City, the oasis was a place that every clan had to fight for in order to grow stronger. No matter which side won, they would usually have to pay a heavy price and would need a long time to lick their wounds. During this period, it was not difficult for the big clans to turn the challengers into watchdogs, especially those clans who believed that the compromise was only temporary and that sooner or later, they would challenge each other to a duel. In the end, none of them managed to ring the sacred bell of Iron Sand City. At that time, a new challenger would appear and sweep the watchdogs out of the game. The large clans used this method to ensure that they wouldn't fall into a predicament where they would be badly hurt. Now that Iron Whip had climbed to the 4th place, even if the challengers challenged him to a duel, they would not come to him. Therefore, it was not a big deal for the small oasis to change hands. However, it was different for the northerners. For example, the Queen of Clearwater had caused a lot of chaos in Iron Sand City. Many people yearned for the evergreen land in the north even though they had been reduced to slaves and thugs. The departure of the 2 potential challengers had emptied the small oasis, so the other challengers could easily challenge each other. Taking advantage of the chaos, Rebecca seized the opportunity and successfully became the 4th big clan. Now, what tricks did they want to play? Keep an eye on those people and find out what's going on. He turned around and ordered his subordinates. Which city did the northerners come from? How many of them are there? What kind of weapons they have and what they're planning to do? Yes, chieftain. Perhaps he should have a discussion with the other big clans. According to the rules of the southernmost region, outsiders were not allowed to interfere. In the afternoon, one of his subordinates brought back a piece of news that Rebecca Bloodwhip could not believe. What did you say? The Osha clan? That's what they said. All the flags in the oasis have been replaced with the Osha clan's war patterns. I also saw the Osha princess who was sold as a slave. She has become a divine lady and is recruiting new clansmen. It seems that many of them have responded. How is this possible? Rebecca was not ignorant of the Northern Kingdom. In the eyes of the people of Grey Castle, the Divine Lady was completely regarded as an evil existence. If the Sand Nation slaves were already miserable enough, then a Divine Lady slave would never have the slightest chance to make a comeback. But now, how did she win the support of the Northerners and lead them back to the southernmost region as an avenger? He felt an indescribable sense of absurdity and panic. The Majans had been suppressed in the desert not because they liked the desert, but because they had never been able to confront Grey Castle head-on. If the Majans wanted to harm Iron Sand City, the clans might unite to fight against the outsiders. But if the Osha clan, who had the support of the Northerners, only targeted his family, would the other clans still be closely allied with Iron Whip? This was a question that almost did not need to be answered. Damn it! He smashed the wine glass on the table onto the ground and stomped on it, turning it into a pile of crystal fragments. If you want to avenge your father's death through a holy duel, come on, Rebecca thought fiercely. The Northerners may be well-armed and numerous, but in a duel, the Sand Nation of the Majans are the bravest warriors. I'll let you know the taste of despair. Just then, another subordinate entered the hall and said, Chieftain, the Osha clan has sent a gift. What? Rebecca felt the blue veins on his forehead throbbing. A gift? Yes, it's in the garden outside. Take me to see it, he said through gritted teeth. It was a huge wooden box, about the length of a man and half the width of a man. It looked as if it had been pieced together by several ordinary wooden boards. There were iron nails at the four corners, and nothing unusual could be seen from the outside. Where's the person who sent it? Rebecca asked. He's gone. How many of them? Only one person. One person? He raised his eyebrows and stepped forward to kick the box. The wooden box suddenly rolled several times and made a clanking sound. It seemed that there were other things inside. But judging from its weight, it was almost hollow. Are they broken limbs, flesh, or skin peeled off? Other than threats and bluffs, he couldn't think of anything else the other party would send over. Move to Stone Castle, Rebecca said coldly. I'd like to see what tricks they have up their sleeves. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit. Chapter 752. His subordinate opened the wooden box and revealed the gift inside. It was a coffin. A fine coffin. Both the gold foil and the lacquer were exquisite. The pattern on the cover was a pitch-black short whip, which was the war pattern of the Iron Whip clan. Rebecca Bloodwhip was startled at first, but then he could not help sneering. That's it? I thought they would put something more frightening. He shook his head. Skulls, ears, human skin. That's what Iron Sand City does. Coffins? The southernmost region doesn't need such superfluous things. All the dead people here would be thrown into the desert and then turned into bones under the high temperature. No matter what their status was before, it would be the same after death. Only Northerners needed such a coy wooden box. Even if they were dead, they still had to imprison themselves in it like an eternal cage. Osha bitches think they can frighten me like this? He breathed heavily. She had been a slave in Grey Castle for so long that she had probably forgotten the Sand Nation's way of threatening. But this insult still made Rebecca's blood boil. Bring me my axe, he shouted. Immediately, a clansman came with a cast iron axe. The handle was as tall as a man, and the dark axe head was as big as a head. Although he was the chief of the Iron Whip clan, his favorite weapon was this heavy battle axe. Whether it was fighting with the wild beasts in the desert or beheading the challengers, it was very convenient to wield it. In the face of absolute power, all resistance and resistance were meaningless. As long as the axe hit the target, even if he was wearing a northerner's armor, he would be killed in one blow. Of course, it had also drunk the blood of Osha clansmen, including women and children. He forgot to tell Drow Silvermoon that the exiles had not arrived at Endless Cape. Because he had taken a detour and arrived in front of the escort team, then hacked them to death one by one in the yellow sand. He wasn't worried that they would come back for revenge one day. He simply enjoyed the pleasure of killing. Coffins? Fuck them. Rebecca spat and shouted. He raised the battle axe with both hands and swung it at the cover with the iron whip pattern. Crack! A large number of sparks appeared on both sides of the axe, as if it had struck some sort of iron or stone. The coffin did not split into two as he thought. The feeling from the handle told him that this exquisite wooden box was not empty. It was stuffed full of things. But it was too late. After the sparks, an even more dazzling light bloomed from the inside of the coffin. Then, it instantly filled the entire hall and quickly expanded outwards. However, Rebecca didn't see it. When the light swept past his body, his eyeballs and tongue had already been crushed and torn apart by the rapidly expanding wave of air. After that, his head, limbs, and internal organs. With an earth-shattering boom, all the residents of Iron Sand City saw this incredible scene. Raging flames and thick smoke gushed out from the bottom of the Rising Sun stone castle like a raging underground fire. The garden wall was razed to the ground by an invisible giant hand. The entire stone castle seemed to shake violently and then fall apart in the thick smoke. First, the walls fell down, then the pillars and the roof. The falling stones accelerated the eruption of the smoke. Finally, the collapsed stone castle sent a column of smoke into the sky, connecting with the gray sky. It was as if a Tower of Babel had appeared in Iron Sand City. Thuram, who was in the Oasis Tavern, also saw this scene. It was not until this moment that he realized what the story Iron Axe had told him was about. The coffin filled with snow powder, the weight reduced by the Divine Lady, the flint stuck to the cover, and the fuse connected to the top of the cover. No matter if the coffin was destroyed by brute force or the cover was open normally, it would lead to an unparalleled thunder. Although he did not know what snow powder and the fuse were, he knew what thunder was. The muffled sound that could spread for miles and the column of smoke that could be seen in the blood-stained land showed how powerful the unbridled heavenly thunder was. If Iron Whip didn't lie to him and the scene in Iron Sand City was really caused by that coffin, the chief of the Iron Whip clan would probably die. However, Thuram did not expect that Iron Whip would really attack the Iron Whip clan, which ranked the fourth, before the duel, and retaliate in such a blatant way. You! Thuram looked at Iron Axe, whose expression remained unchanged, and could not utter a complete sentence for a long time. Years ago, Rebecca Bloodwhip sullied the holy duel and failed the three gods' expectations. How could I have a fair fight with a man who had lost the right to duel in the Land of Fire? Iron Axe said calmly, Rebecca and his clansmen were just a bunch of cowards. I never regarded them as my opponents from the very beginning. But Iron Whip is a big clan after all. Because of this kind of ending is more suitable for them rather than a glorious death in the ring. Iron Axe shook his head. Besides, the Osha clan will not violate the rules set by the three gods. Once the opponent surrenders, we'll put away our weapons and spare the duelists' lives. He paused for a moment. Think about it. If you were the chief of the Iron Whip clan and you knew that the Osha clan had come back, what would you do? Thuram immediately understood what Iron Axe meant. Indeed, if the rules were broken once, they could be broken again. A trespasser who did not abide by the rules set by the three gods would bring them endless trouble. Even if they wanted to reverse the defeat 8 years ago through the holy duel, they would still be harassed and framed by their opponents before and after the duel began. Therefore, it was better to crush them completely from the very beginning than to be tired of guarding against them later. But if Rebecca didn't open the coffin or destroy it, your plan wouldn't work, would it? Thuram had only one question left in his mind. The chief of the Iron Whip clan is violent and likes to destroy and kill. It's not much harder to guess what he would do than to tease a monkey. Iron Axe slightly raised the corner of his mouth. Besides, the snow powder coffin is just an appetizer. Even if Rebecca luckily escapes, there are still many gifts waiting for him. But now it seems that the three gods will not protect a traitor who has turned his back on them. Hearing this, Thurum could not help shuddering. When he swore loyalty to Drow Silvermoon and the new Osha clan, he had also sworn in the name of the three gods. Iron Axe's last sentence was also a warning to him. Now we can talk about business. The half-breed patted Thurum's shoulder as if nothing had happened. Another reason why I chose you is that you know Iron Sand City like the back of your hand. People in the oasis say that there's nothing in the desert that you don't know. It's just that I've been here for a long time and heard more stories. After defeating the Watchdog and easily killing the Iron Whip clan, Thurum became much more respectful to Iron Axe, the Princess of Osha, and the Grey Castle force behind them. But if I know something, I'll definitely tell you in detail. Good. If you want to win the holy duel, you have to carefully understand your enemies. You can start with the warriors and divine ladies of each clan. Iron Axe nodded. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 753. At present, everything is going well in the southernmost region. The Iron Whip clan has been destroyed. Echo asked me to express her gratitude to you. It takes time to prepare for the holy duel. I predict that the clans of Iron Sand City will go to the Land of Fire in a week. During this time, I've hired some of my clansmen to mark the location of the underground Styx River. I believe that we'll soon be able to find a Blackwater River that's relatively close to the coast. Also, what do you plan to do with the goddess of the clan? Greetings, Iron Axe. Your Majesty, this is the message from the southernmost region. The sigil of listening flashed a faint red light. Countess Spear's voice paused after the report, obviously waiting for Roland's reply. Then, Nightingale handed the other talisman over. Since she was sitting on the table, the seal was placed right next to her slender thighs. Although it was not summer, she was still wearing tight black trousers, showing off her perfect figure. If Roland wanted to talk to the sigil, he had to get close to her legs. It had to be said that this was a difficult choice. He didn't know whether he should look at him openly or pretend to glance at him casually. Well done. I mean Iron Axe. Your Majesty, are you all right? The Earl replied, I can hear your voice is a little hoarse. Please keep warm in the winter, your body is not as strong as a witch's. I'm fine. Roland cleared his throat and said, Tell Iron Axe that if there are no major deviations, let him continue with the plan. As for the goddess, we can fight for her, but if she doesn't want to leave the southernmost region, don't force her. Is that all? All right, I'll let you know if I have any other requests. I understand. Then allow me to take my leave, Your Majesty. The red light on the seal was extinguished. Roland turned around and exhaled softly. What's with this feeling of loss? Nightingale chuckled and put away the sigil. She returned to the recliner in a flash and continued to munch on the dried fish while reading the comic strip of the witch story. Roland pursed his lips and focused his attention on the matter at hand. In this desert operation, they had invested all their sigil of listening and used Countess Spear Passy of Fallen Dragon Ridge as a transit point to achieve instant communication between Neverwinter and the advanced troops. Although communication was still a little inconvenient, compared to the initial delivery of letters that took 10 to 15 days and the daily flight of messengers, this method of communication was already considered as fast as lightning. He finally had the feeling of being able to survey the entire situation without leaving the territory. Unfortunately, the sigil of listening required a witch to inject her magic power into it to take effect. Moreover, in order to achieve a conversation between two parties, at least 2 sets of sigil and 2 witches were needed. This meant that it was destined to be unable to replace the telephone and other communication tools that ordinary people could use. Now, the first telephone line in the western region had entered the stage of laying. It would directly connect the office of the castle to the city hall of the Longsong district. The second and third lines were also being planned. It was expected that the two city halls would be connected, so that orders would only need a phone call. Considering that it was time-consuming and laborious to erect electric poles, and that it was prone to be damaged by ice and snow, Roland decided to lay the cable along the mountain range and sink it into the ground through Lotus, which was both convenient and safe. After the mountain defense line was established, he was bound to increase the line of communication with the front line. At that time, he was afraid that he would have to put more than 10 hand-cranked telephones in his office. In addition, the migration of the ancient tequila witches was also the focus of Roland's attention. Maggie and Lightning took on the role of early warning and expanded the scope of investigation to the area 10 kilometers north of the mountains in order to detect large-scale demonic beast attacks in advance. After all, the relics of the gods were likely to determine the survival of the tribe, so it was not too much to handle it carefully. He had many conversations with Pasha in the past 2 weeks. Their plan was very simple. First, let the worm carrier open up a mountain passage to the western region, and then choose a place with stable rock strata and fewer forks to build a palace. Next, the ancient witches would move the carrier, the documents, and the bodies of the gods' punishment army to the new residence. Finally, it was the turn of the instrument of divine retribution and the relics of the gods. The one who was most enthusiastic about the relocation was a witch named Fran, or rather, the devouring worm. She opened her bloody mouth, twisted her plump body, and squeezed in front of the phantom instrument. When she excitedly expressed her gratitude to Roland, he was really shocked. Later, after Pasha explained it to him, he understood that the witches who had devoted themselves to the carrier could no longer be stored in Scourge's body. Their perception and consciousness were consolidated with the new body. The advantage was that they did not need to go through a long period of practice to use the carrier, but the disadvantage was that once the body was damaged, they had no spare carrier to replace it. Come to think of it, if the witches did not use this method of joining, perhaps they would not be able to move the carrier even if they practiced for a lifetime. How could a person who was used to 4 limbs and 10 fingers control countless tentacles or move forward like a worm? On the contrary, once they adapted to this strange carrier, it was estimated that there was no way to return to the previous way of life. Because the devouring worm consumed a lot of food to feed, when not in use, the ancient witches had to transfer Fran back into the soul container and put her into eternal sleep. This was obviously not a good experience. It could be said that Fran sacrificed her own future for the continuation of the Tequila tribe. The price she paid was even heavier than that of Pasha, Aletheia, and the others who had been transformed into the original carriers. At least the latter could always observe the world and feel the changes and replacement of the outside world. Therefore, it could be imagined how grateful she was to Roland. The key point was that he had boasted that there was endless work waiting for Fran in Neverwinter, which meant that he had to spend a lot of food to keep her energetic. Fortunately, the worm was an omnivorous carrier, so it could accept both grain and meat. I want to eat hot meat porridge sprinkled with spices and a whole cow roasted until its skin is shiny. When Fran said these words, she was basically drooling. Although the worm looked a little ugly, like the sarcoma, it could sense the outside environment in a unique way, including taste, pain, and temperature. Roland could only accept her gratitude with a smile and tears in his heart. It seemed that no matter in which world, the construction industry was a huge gold-devouring monster. He also asked Pasha what the original and central carriers relied on to fill their stomachs. The answer he got was soil and high temperature, which was also the reason why they liked to soak in magma. This answer made Roland feel a little relieved. Compared to the devouring worm, the sarcoma probably absorbed energy more like a plant. In this way, he did not have to bear the food expenses of these people who were close to an infinite life. Just as he was thinking about how to plan the defense line in the mountains so that the military facilities built underground could better connect with the existing crossroads and even the ancient witch's palace, he suddenly heard an explosion outside the window. Surprised, Roland turned to look at the French window and saw a plume of black smoke rising from a corner of the town, mixed with some faintly visible flames. The smoke came from the direction of the school near the stone inner wall. Nightingale. I'll ask Sylvie and Phyllis to go and have a look. Your Majesty, don't leave the office. I'll be back soon. While speaking, Nightingale had already disappeared into the mist. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 754. Lily, have you heard? Mystery Moon rushed into the bedroom and put her face in front of Lily. Something happened in the college district. Go away. You're blocking my light. She pushed Mystery Moon's face away and continued to adjust the focus of the microscope. She sighed inwardly. Today's replication test was probably going to fail again. There was not only an explosion, but also a big fire. Who do you think did it? The church or the demons? The church has been defeated by His Majesty. The demons are thousands of miles away from us. Lily raised her head impatiently and rolled her eyes at her. I guess some idiot stole the waste from the chemistry lab and brought it into the classroom. Similar things had happened before. For example, half a month ago, a researcher casually brought a failed piece of pyrocotton back home, wanting to use it as a kindling for the stove. In the end, it was accidentally set on fire by a child, almost burning the house to the ground. His Majesty was furious after the incident. His voice could even be heard in the castle reprimanding those responsible. After that, the regulations of the chemistry lab were increased several times. The new regulations, which Lily had seen in scroll, were changed from a thin piece of parchment to a book as thick as an index finger. But there was an explosion this time. How can you be so indifferent to what happened in Neverwinter? This is also our home, Mystery Moon said plausibly. Stop bluffing. You're just too curious and want to know the answer as soon as possible. Lily said angrily, that's why it should be handled by more professional people. Besides, what I'm doing now is also for the development of Neverwinter. She paused and said, but you've been interfering with my experiment and idling around all day. Mystery Moon gave a strange smile. Then what have you achieved? Oh. Lily suddenly felt suffocated. No, right? You've been staring at the microscope for more than a year, but you haven't helped His Majesty. My electromagnetic power has brought light to His Majesty at night, so that people can continue to work even at night. Mystery Moon raised her nose and said, oh, but I don't despise you, my old friend. Finding out the truth of the problem is also a help to His Majesty. Please don't mind me, Lily said hatefully. She did not know why it was difficult for her to transform the broodmother into a specific species of tiny insects. She could control the shape of the broodmother and try to get as close as possible to the target she wanted to assimilate, but she could not break through this obstacle. The little girl faintly felt that something seemed to be missing between the two, but she couldn't find a specific clue. So after her ability evolved, other than treating some cold plagues, she spent the rest of her time dealing with microscopes. Maggie summoned the magic ark, which carried them to the academy area. Through the roof of the ark, Lily could clearly see the scenery on the ground. It was a wonderful feeling. It was as if they were sneaking under the ground, but it was like swimming in the sea. When they looked up, they could see the blue waves on the surface. A cordon had been pulled up near the academy, and black uniformed policemen were guarding at every intersection to prevent residents from approaching. However, this symbolic blockade was meaningless to the ark. They went straight through the streets and walls and entered the academy. This was originally a mansion of a noble in Stronghold. Later, it was further expanded by His Majesty and became the primary academy of Neverwinter today. However, most of the houses were still made of wood, instead of the red bricks and cement used in the residential area. At this time, the fire had long been put out. Judging from the blackened outer wall, the location of the fire should be on the second floor of the main teaching building. Part of the wall had fallen off, and a pile of glass debris was scattered on the ground, probably caused by the explosion. They waited underground for a while to make sure that no one came in or out of the academy and the whole building was empty. Then, they asked Maggie to control the ark and float to the ground next to the teaching building. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 755. A group of people crept into the building and climbed up to the second floor. The smell of burning wood still lingered in the corridor, and scattered books and papers could be seen everywhere, probably left by the students who fled in panic. Following the smell of burning wood, they soon found the scene of the accident, a classroom near the end of the corridor. Walking into the room, Lily noticed that one corner of the room had become pitch black, and the entire wall was cracked, and the cracks extended to the floor. The fire area was not large, and the range of the fire was obvious. The blackened wood spread like ripples from deep to shallow, which did not seem to be caused by natural arson at all. However, what she was most concerned about were the cracks. They were almost as if they had been cut by an axe, and the gaps had been completely carbonized. When she put her fingers into them, she could still feel a faint residual heat. "It should be here." Mystery Moon walked around the corner and said, "Summer, I'll leave the rest to you." "Well, if someone comes, remember to interrupt me." Summer walked to the center of the classroom and displayed her backtracking ability. Since the time of the explosion was determined, and it had happened less than a day ago, she quickly found the key point before the accident. As magic power gushed out, the damaged wall became as good as before, and the crooked chairs were restored to their original positions. Many students appeared in the empty classroom. Some of them were sleeping on their desks, and some gathered together to chat. There was no teacher on the podium, so it should be the lunch break. Seeing this scene for the first time, Maggie and Vanilla could not help but exclaim. Then, as if afraid of disturbing Summer, they hurriedly covered their mouths. Especially when they saw a student walk towards them as if nothing had happened, but pass through their bodies like a ghost, the two of them stepped back in panic and almost fell to the ground. "Don't worry, these are just illusions," Evelyn explained enthusiastically. "Summer can backtrack time and make things that have already happened reappear. This is really an amazing ability." It was also the first time for Amy to see this, but she did not show the slightest fear. Instead, she said with admiration, "Huh, it's not that amazing." Summer touched her head with some embarrassment. "Compared to Sister Nightingale, my ability is nothing." "Nightingale? Are you talking about the golden-haired big sister who is always by His Majesty's side and rarely shows herself?" "Yes, she's the most powerful witch in the entire Western region, maybe even in the entire kingdom." "Impressive." Amy's eyes sparkled. "Wait," Mystery Moon suddenly interrupted them. "Look." Lily frowned. "This is bullying?" Evelyn said softly. 5 to 6 teenagers surrounded two girls in a corner, arguing fiercely about something. The two girls who were surrounded had completely different reactions. One of them stood in front of the crowd with her arms outstretched, shouting loudly without flinching, while the other hugged her head and hid behind the former, looking quite frightened. Since the elementary class did not have a uniform enrollment age, the oldest of the group looked to be around 15 or 16 years old. He was taller than the two girls combined, and his posture was overwhelming. However, the stubborn short-haired girl was not intimidated by the large number of people. Even though she was alone, she was not at a disadvantage at all. From the movement of their lips, it could be inferred that the content of the dispute was related to their birthplace, such as telling them to go back to the eastern region and become the Traitor King's lackeys. Soon, the dispute turned into a shoving. The tall boy took the lead and tried to push the girl to the ground. Unexpectedly, as soon as he grabbed her shoulder, he was kicked in the knee, and his whole body suddenly tilted. The scene became chaotic for a while. Like a slippery loach, the girl slipped out of the encirclement and kicked a fat boy to the ground, attracting everyone's attention. No one cared about the poor girl who was sobbing with her head in her hands anymore. The crowd swarmed toward the short-haired girl, while the latter wandered in the back half of the classroom, using other students as cover. Her movements were as flexible as a cat's. Due to her inferior height, every time she kicked the opponent's knee or ankle, she could make the opponent kneel on the ground with one blow, unable to get up for a long time. "This kid is so strong," Mystery Moon said in astonishment. "Come on, beat them to the ground." Amy could not help but clench her fists, as if she was there in person. "But she's too weak," Vanilla said worriedly. "And if she only attacks one part, It's easy for her opponent to guard against it. It's not good for her to fight. Hey, how do you know that? Mystery Moon looked at her in surprise. I'm sorry, I just used to. The church has taught you this, right? Evelyn comforted her. It's okay. Since you can pass His Majesty's inspection, it means that you're not the same kind of people as those vicious pure witches. Lily frowned and did not say a word. She also agreed with Vanilla's opinion. Although the students who were kicked to the ground looked very embarrassed, they could still get up with a limp after recovering and continue to encircle the short-haired girl. Moreover, this time they were much more cautious in protecting their legs, so it was not so easy for the opponent to succeed. Suddenly, the tall man grabbed a chair and swung it down from behind her while her attention was distracted by the other two. Watch out! Amy yelled. But the illusion only recorded what had happened, so her warning could not alert the girl to the sneak attack from behind. The chair leg hit her head and knocked her to the ground. The moment she fell, she rolled away from the attack of the two people in front of her and squatted on the ground, covering her head with her teeth. It could be seen that the girl's fingertips were stained with blood. Blood slowly flowed from the hair near her ear and dyed half of her face red. The tall boy was also a little stunned, probably because he did not expect the other party to take the hit. He hesitated for a while, then threw the chair to the ground and walked toward her step by step. Just when everyone thought the situation was over, the girl suddenly showed a painful expression and opened her mouth to scream. Although the witches present could not hear her voice, they could tell from her expression how much pain she was suffering at the moment. Even when she was hit in the head by the chair, she did not look like this. Then, a bolt of lightning leaped out from her fingertips, followed by a second, a third. The lightning spread along the floor, leaving a twisted orange trail behind it. When it came into contact with the window, it suddenly exploded with a bright flash. In an instant, sparks flew in all directions, like iron and stone colliding. The glass was shattered and a big hole was blown in the wall. Everyone turned around and fled in panic, no longer caring about the short-haired girl who was shrouded by the electric light. For the fastest novel reading without errors, please visit Chapter 756. Is this an awakening? Evelyn asked in surprise. Most likely. Lily nodded. During the first awakening, the magic power gathered in the body, which was equivalent to a backfire, and the pain was far more painful than a scalp cut. Many witches would unconsciously display their abilities at this moment, and it was also the moment when they were most likely to be exposed. If this happened 2 or 3 years ago, the only outcome for an awakened in public would be death. The electric lights soon disappeared, but the floor and the outer wall of the classroom were ignited by the thunderbolt. The orange-red trail gradually rose into the air, and thick smoke billowed out. The girl forced herself to return to her friend, who was already petrified. She yelled twice, grabbed her friend's wrist, and dragged her out of the danger zone. Lily raised her eyebrows in appreciation. Although the first backlash was not fatal, it was still an unprecedented experience. After the backlash, one would often feel weak all over and break out in cold sweat. It was very rare for a 10-year-old girl to be able to control her body in such a state without forgetting her companion behind her. The fire did not spread quickly. After all, the source of the fire caused by the electric discharge was very small. By the time the second half of the classroom was gradually engulfed by the fire, everyone had already left the teaching building. Seeing the truth, Summer ended the backtracking. Very good, we have another sister. Lily raised the corner of her mouth. She could foresee that Mystery Moon was quite a good girl. Regardless of her ability, at least she was brave and strong-willed. Only after seeing her would she realize that not all witches were as bad as Mystery Moon. At this point, she deliberately glanced at Mystery Moon, only to find that the latter was still in shock, apparently not paying attention to what she had said. What's wrong with this idiot? We have to tell Sister Vendi quickly. Amy suggested. There's a new witch in Neverwinter. Agreed. Evelyn nodded. Let's go to the castle now. Vendi probably already knew. Lily shrugged, but she did not say her thoughts. After all, After wandering around, she planned to return to her bedroom to continue observing those tiny insects, and it was on the way. Mystery Moon? When they walked to the door, they found that Mystery Moon was still in a daze. "Ah, I'm here." She shook her head and followed the others in a daze. "Are you okay?" Evelyn touched her head. "I'm fine," Mystery Moon replied in a low voice, completely different from her previous excitement. "What a strange fellow." Lily curled her lips, held her hand, and injected the queen insect into her body. Although an idiot wouldn't catch a cold, but what if an accident happened? They took the magic ark back to the witch building and reported the matter to Vendi. As expected, Vendi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Do I still need you to find out the truth?" When Sylvie was in the castle, she discovered the magic reaction in the academy area. She went there and asked, and then she found out everything. Vendi stretched out her hand and knocked on each of their foreheads. Sneaking through the cordon and breaking into a potentially dangerous place without permission, you're trying to get closer to lightning. Do you want to be locked up and do 3 sets of comprehensive tests? Everyone's expression changed drastically as they shook their heads repeatedly. "Ah, I almost forgot." Evelyn suddenly clapped her hands. "Before dinner, I have to check the tavern's inventory. I also have a difficult question to ask Isabella." Maggie bowed deeply. I'll leave first." "Me too." Vanilla hurriedly ran out after her. Amy racked her brains for a while, but still couldn't come up with a suitable excuse. In the end, she was directly dragged out of the office by Summer. Lily sighed. "If Vendi really wants to punish you, do you think you can escape like this? Besides, 3 sets of test questions will only take you 1 night. It's not a bad idea to consolidate the knowledge you've learned." After apologizing to Vendi with her hand on Mystery Moon's head, she also returned to her bedroom. "Can you tell me now? What happened?" Closing the door, Lily looked at her sorrowful roommate and rolled her eyes. "Don't you want me to care about you like this?" "Lily!" Mystery Moon's nose twitched. "New witches can discharge electricity." "So what?" "Electricity is magnetism. Magnetism is electricity. In other words, I'm her and she's me." Mystery Moon said worriedly. "What if she's stronger than me and His Majesty doesn't need me anymore?" Lily almost choked on her saliva. "How can you say that? Even if you two have the same ability, His Majesty won't deliberately not use the other one. But there will always be comparisons. Then you'll always be different." Lily suddenly froze. "Always different? Wait, what did you say before?" "Electricity is magnetism?" "A little behind." She's me." "I see." Lily only felt a bang in her head, and a new idea appeared in her mind. She no longer cared about Mystery Moon. She ran to the desk, picked up a drop of water from a cup, put it under the microscope, and focused on adjusting the focus. "What do you mean by, I see?" Mystery Moon protested. "Hey, can't you comfort me a little more? Don't bother me." She waved her hand. "If you don't want to be outdone by her, you'd better start to study hard from now on. That way, you may have a little hope." Yes, comparisons were always different. No matter how many tiny worms she drew to make the parent as similar as possible to the target, the parent could never become the target. Because of the limitations of observation, she could not see every detail of the worm. As long as she magnified the microscope a little more, or the worm moved, the parent she made through comparison would become very different. If she wanted to transform it into a specific worm, the two should be one. Lily soon found a target, a transparent worm that looked like a rotten grape. This kind of worm was very common in the water, and she often used it as a comparison. She gently touched the glass and summoned an invisible parent worm. She restrained its impulse to assimilate the target and used its tentacles to approach the grape worm little by little, gradually overlapping with the target. Then the parent worm began to infiltrate the body of the grape worm, occupying every corner of its body until its whole body turned light purple. The parent worm was the worm, and the worm was also the parent worm. When she released the restriction, for the first time, the parent worm did not instantly change back to its original form as usual, but began to swim in the form of a grapeworm. All kinds of worms around it turned into rotten grapes, and this process soon spread to the whole water drop. After a quarter of an hour, Lily could no longer find any tiny worms except for the grapeworm. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, visit Chapter 757. Your Majesty, the statistics of the accident treatment are out. Barav and Scroll walked into Roland's office together. Oh, Roland asked with concern. How's the situation? Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. The reply from the City Hall director made him feel relieved. 3 people suffered fractures, all of which were caused by falling down while escaping. 2 people lost their hearing, which was probably caused by the explosion. 1 person was burned, but after Miss Nana's treatment, everyone has recovered. At that time, the teachers who were taking a lunch break in the lounge immediately organized an evacuation after hearing the loud noise. Philin Eltek claimed that the First Army was practicing, simulating the enemy's raid on the school, and asked the students to cooperate and not panic. This statement helped to maintain the order at the scene, except for the 6th class who witnessed the witch's awakening. Scroll added, so the patients with fractures and hearing loss were all students from the same class. As expected of the light of dawn, Roland could not help but praise. Using the First Army's great prestige in Neverwinter not only made it convenient to maintain order, but also to reduce panic. In this way, the impact was reduced to a minimum. As long as appropriate remedial measures were taken afterwards, most people would not realize that the awakening of witches was actually a very dangerous process. Of course, it was also crucial for the awakened to control their abilities within a very small range. The loud explosion was caused by the electric current breaking through the air and forming an arc path with the metal bolts on the window. The principle of the explosion was the same as the sound of thunder. It sounded earth-shattering, but it was not very harmful. As for putting out the fire, Agatha was good at it. When she arrived at the scene, it only took her a few minutes to freeze the source of the fire, so the main teaching building was spared. Although Roland had already considered whether to replace the buildings with brick and concrete structures to prevent similar things from happening again. Your Majesty, how do you plan to deal with this matter? Barav asked. Do you have any ideas? Roland knocked on the table and did not answer directly. I think it should be divided into 2 parts. The steward pondered for a moment. The fight between the children isn't the main point. The main point is the conflict behind it. According to the current situation, one side of the conflict is from the Southern Territory, while the other side is from the Eastern Territory. The cause of the conflict is a dispute over whether the Eastern Territory is the home of the rebel king. As you know, Timothy's territory happens to be the Valencia of the Eastern Territory, which has yet to surrender to you. So, he paused and hid the second half of his words, probably because he did not want to talk too much about the struggle of the royal family. In short, if not for the adults announcing it behind their backs, the children would not have known about these things. Severely punish the parents of the instigator of the conflict and make it clear that it is forbidden to discuss the matter of rebelling against the king. This will put an end to this kind of conflict. Please continue. The second point is that the awakening of witches may cause harm to the people. My suggestion is that no matter what sentence you decide, it should be written into the law so that disputes can be effectively avoided. Roland glanced at the old steward with great interest but did not express his opinion. In fact, the fact that he could notice the root cause behind the fight proved that he had a relatively broad vision, which was obviously not something that the former Assistant Minister of Finance could perceive. During his more than 2 years in power, he had also made great progress. However, the limitations of the era still existed in Barav's thinking. He believed that everything would be fine as long as the decree was written into the law. However, the law still had to be enforced by people, especially in a centralized system of government that eliminated the power of the local nobles. After all, the more power one had, the more responsibility one had to bear. If the law conflicted with the demands of the majority of people, the hidden dangers would sooner or later erupt, and it would not be easy to deal with it at that time. What about you? Roland looked at Scroll. Your Majesty, I have some different views. Now that the subjects of Neverwinter come from all over Grey Castle, there will always be various kinds of conflicts. If we ban one after another, I'm afraid that the law will become quite bloated. I suggest that we guide them in the direction of their discussion and clearly tell them what is right and what is wrong, which may be more appropriate than banning all of them. Scroll paused for a moment. As for the second point, I think you can first ask Miss Agatha for her opinion. Tequila has many awakened witches, so they should be very familiar with this kind of situation. Roland picked up the teacup and slowly took a sip. Indeed, compared to a one-size-fits-all policy, he preferred to use public opinion to control people's minds. This matter did not involve the conflict between nations or kingdoms, so it was much more relaxed than the complicated situation caused by the awakening of nationalism in later generations. It was not difficult to spread propaganda that all the people in Grey Castle, or even the Four Kingdoms, were the same kind of people. The conflict this time was just the simplest regional conflict, so there was no need to treat it as a model and deal with it severely. It was far better to write the argument that everyone was the same kind of people, that the traitors were just a small group of people with ulterior motives, and that the majority of the people should not be responsible for it in the textbooks. It was far better than forbidding people to discuss this matter and increasing the gap between different regions. The difficulty lay in the relationship between ordinary people and witches. He did not want to make the witches special, but the existence of witches itself was very special, and there was a certain degree of irreconcilability between the two. Alleviating this contradiction as much as possible was undoubtedly a very long-term task, and it was very likely that it would affect the future of all human beings. Since there was no immediate solution, he might as well follow Scroll's words and look at the way Tequila handled it, then slowly adjust it. Fortunately, this matter had a very small impact, so it could be handled in a relatively easy way to start the implementation of the integration policy. Thinking of this, Roland ordered, "This matter will be handled as an ordinary fight. The student who hit the witches with a chair will pay for their medical expenses and verbally reprimand them. The Witch Union will pay for the medical expenses of the injured students of Class 6. City Hall will be responsible for the repair of the school, and the Academy will resume normal classes as soon as possible." "Yes, Your Majesty," the two responded in unison. In addition, as for the follow-up preventive measures, follow Scroll's words and try to use public opinion to guide the people. I'll make a specific draft for you to perfect and implement. Roland let out a long sigh. "By the way, that witch, her name is Sharon. Your Majesty, do you want to see her?" Scroll asked. "There's no need. Let her rest for a few days first and calm down. If possible, ask Vendi to accompany her and tell her some basic information about the Witch Union." "I understand." After the two left, Roland immediately called Agatha and Phyllis into his office. "Your Majesty, I also have something to discuss with you." Before they sat down, Agatha said with a serious expression, "There seems to be something wrong with the awakening of the witches in Neverwinter. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 758. Roland was startled. "Is there a problem?" "It's like this." Phyllis hesitated. "I heard that only one witch awakened in your territory last year. Is that true?" He took out a list from the drawer, which was given to him by Vendi. It recorded each witch's awakening day and adulthood day so that he would not miss the witch's second rebirth. "That should be it." Roland looked through the list and nodded. Although 2 new witches joined in the months of demons last year, Paper had already awakened 3 years ago. Summer was the only one who awakened that year, and the day of her awakening happened to be the day of her adulthood. "That shouldn't be the case, Your Majesty." Phyllis frowned. "How many people were there in your city last year? 20,000 or 30,000? About 50,000. Speaking of population, Roland could not help but feel proud. This year, the number of people in Neverwinter has exceeded 100,000. 100,000 is almost the same as the number of Arietta in the early days. Before they withdrew from the fertile plains, the number of tequila was only about 250,000, but do you know how many people awaken in these two holy cities every year? Phyllis said in a low voice. Even during the period when magic power was at its lowest, there were no less than 10 people in Arietta, and nearly 3 times that number in Tequila. Period when magic power is low. Yes, the magic power that fills this world fluctuates, just like the tide. Agatha explained. The 2 years after the bloody moon is also the time when magic power is the most abundant, and new witches will appear almost every day. Then, the free magic power will gradually weaken, and the period between the 2 bloody moons can be regarded as the period when magic power is low. Only during the months of demons will there be witches awakening. Roland had heard Agatha mention before that the stronger the magic power, the easier it was for witches to awaken. However, he had thought that the magic power would have a peak every year, but he did not expect that it would fluctuate greatly in a cycle of hundreds of years. But we're not far from the third battle of divine will. This is the most worrying problem, Phyllis said worriedly. The appearance of the fearful beast of hell means that the bloody moon is coming and the magic power should be more active. According to Celine's test, this is indeed the case. But why is the number of witches awakening so low? Even if no witches awakened in the city, there should be many witches born in the towns and villages in the suburbs. For example, during the Tequila era, the surrounding territories provided more witches than the Holy City. Generally speaking, the greater the total population, the more witches there will be. This is the law that the Union has concluded for hundreds of years. At first, I thought that Neverwinter deliberately abandoned women when recruiting people. Later, I thought that the influence of the church made the new witches not dare to easily reveal their identities, so they didn't immediately join Neverwinter. It turns out that it wasn't the case. Agatha said slowly. Pasha has also discussed it, and the final conclusion is that there may be some factors affecting the awakening of new witches, and the trend is gradually expanding. Roland pondered for a while before saying, assuming that this guess is correct, do you have a way to find out what exactly caused this? The two looked at each other and shook their heads in unison. Since we can't find a solution, let's take it as a temporary rest for the gods. Roland spread out his hands and said, anyway, no matter how the awakening rate changes, we have to drive the demons out of the land of dawn, right? Fortunately, once the foundation of industrial production was established, the demand for witches was far less than that of the gods' punishment army or the plan of the Chosen One. Otherwise, it would really be terrible news. What you said is right. Phyllis probably did not expect that Roland's confidence in fighting against the demons was not affected at all. She was stunned for a while and then came to her senses. In any case, we have to defeat the demons. That's right, Roland said with a smile. By the way, I called you here to ask something. He told them about his concern about the possible harm caused by the awakening of witches. How did the Union deal with this kind of thing in the Tequila era? It's very simple, Your Majesty. Phyllis's tone became more respectful. She no longer looked directly at Roland but slightly lowered her head. Everyone in that era knew the rule of half an hour. The rule of half an hour? Before a witch awakens, there are signs. The process of magic power drifting from the state to gathering in the body of the awakened will last about half an hour, Phyllis replied. At first, there will be a faint tingling and burning pain in the abdomen, and then it will become more and more intense until the first backfire occurs. The specific degree of pain varies from person to person. Those who are strong won't even be affected much, but they can still feel the slight tingling. She paused. The rule of half an hour is that as long as a witch loudly announces that she is about to awaken within this time, the people around her must immediately leave her side. If there is any injury or death caused by failure to evade, the common people can't ask for compensation from the Union. If there is any damage to a fixed place, the Union will pay for it. This is a new method, Roland thought. The premise is that everyone is very familiar with witches, especially underage girls. When they encounter a sudden tingling pain, their first reaction is to announce it, instead of suspecting that they have eaten something bad. What if the victim is also a witch? If they don't announce it in advance, the newly awakened will face punishment such as whipping or money, depending on the consequences. If they announce it in advance, the union will take full responsibility. However, this situation is not common. After all, combat witches are already a minority, and there are even fewer witches who can cause harm at the early stage of awakening. In other words, in the era of tequila, if the common people did not avoid it in time, they could only blame themselves. In that special era where witches were superior to others, it was understandable for them to do so. Obviously, Roland could not copy this method, but he could use it as a reference to a certain extent. There was no doubt that, apart from the punishment part, the rule of half an hour had its advantages. It at least promoted the idea that witches were born within the human race, and that every underage girl could awaken as a witch, regardless of whether they accepted it or not. This was just like the red light in the future, and the green light in the future. The only thing everyone could do was to abide by the rules to avoid damage. Of course, it was impossible to completely exempt witches from liability. Roland thought, if we take a step back from this rule and treat witches and ordinary people the same, and the city hall will be responsible for the harm caused after the announcement is made, and if there is no announcement and serious consequences, they will be tried as negligent wounding. Or we can make a special law to regulate the behavior of witches, just like the traffic laws in the future. Maybe this kind of contradiction can be alleviated to a certain extent. For the fastest updated novel reading, please visit Chapter 759. When Vendi walked into the hospital with a box of dinner in her hand, she saw Nana's father, Sir Pine, talking with a man and a woman. Then the two men bent their knees as if they wanted to kneel down, but were stopped by Viscount Pine. After a moment of stalemate, the two of them could only bow a few times before leaving while turning their heads back every few steps. When they disappeared at the gate, Vendi curiously walked over and asked, "Who are they?" Who else could it be? That little devil's parents. Sir Pine shrugged. They were worried about the child staying alone in the hospital, so they asked if they could take her home. However, when he found out that it was His Majesty's idea to let her stay here, he immediately changed his mind and thanked His Majesty profusely. When he reached the latter half of his sentence, his tone was a little regretful, but also a little proud. Vendi could not help but laugh. "Do you think everyone can be like you, daring to break into the Lord's castle for their daughter?" She knew what he was regretting. Probably in the Viscount's eyes, even if it was His Majesty's request, he should not easily hand over his daughter. When Nana awakened, Sir Pine did not even prepare a letter of visit, and directly went to Roland's castle. Fortunately, the fourth prince himself was generous and merciful, and he didn't have any intention of persecuting the witches, so this story became a well-told story. Otherwise, if it had been the mansion of Duke Ryan or one of the great nobles of the Western region, Mr. Pine would have suffered a lot. Although this had happened before Vendi's arrival in Border Town, she had already heard Nightingale's story many times, so she naturally understood why Sir Pine was so proud. Compared to Summer's parents, they are much better. Thinking of this, Vendi sighed. Summer's family had also awakened as a witch, but the only thing they could think of was the Golden Dragon. Not only did they eagerly send their daughter to Roland, but they also ordered her to do whatever His Majesty and the Witch Union asked. They completely regarded Summer as a commodity to be sold. If it weren't for the fact that the Golden Dragon was directly handed over to them, it was estimated that the family would not allow Xia to return home. Because of this completely different attitude, after Summer became familiar with her sisters, she gradually got used to living freely in the witch building and went back less and less often. For a witch, she was lucky. But as a girl, her parents had abandoned her. "That's also true," Mr. Tigu nodded. "One of them works in the furnace area and the other is a handyman in the construction team. They only heard the news after a busy day, so they didn't even have a meal before coming here. At least from their expressions, I can tell that they still care a lot about that kid. It seems that I didn't bring this box of dinner for nothing." Vendi smiled. "Can you take me to see Sharon?" "Of course, please come with me," Sir Pine said while stroking his beard. According to His Majesty's request, the expanded medical hospital had set up a residential area for patients, but very few people actually needed to stay in the hospital for treatment. Nana and Lily almost took care of all the diseases in Neverwinter. Most patients only needed to wait in the hall for a while before they recovered and left. The main reason why Sharon stayed overnight in the medical hospital was to prevent accidents. After all, the influence of the church had not completely disappeared. It was still unknown whether the immigrants from all over Grey Castle had accepted the idea that witches and ordinary people could coexist in a friendly manner. But now, at least Sharon did not have to worry about being killed by her family or becoming homeless. When they arrived at the door of a ward in the residential area, Sir Pine pushed open the door and waved to his daughter, who was lying on the bed. "It's time to eat. I'll talk to my friend later." "Aren't we eating together?" Nana asked in surprise. Then she saw Vendi and said, "Sister Vendi, you're here too." "Yes." Vendi smiled and patted the box of dinner. "I brought her dinner." "I see." The little girl suddenly understood. "You guys talk first. I'll come back later." She said goodbye to Sharon and followed her father out of the room. Vendi walked to the bedside and put the box of dinner on the cabinet. She turned around and looked at the patient who was looking at her curiously. "How does it feel to be a witch?" The girl had very bright short hair, like a rose that had just sprouted. It was a rare hair color in Grey Castle. Her facial features were still not fully developed and looked somewhat immature, but with the awakening of her magic, a witch's appearance would gradually improve. Vendi could already imagine how outstanding she would be when she became an adult. "I feel like there's something in my body." Miss Nana said it's magic power. Sharon pursed her lips and said, "Are you also a witch? Does it always hurt for the first time?" "Yes, you can call me Vendi." Although it sounded a little ambiguous, she knew what Sharon was referring to. As for the second question, the answer is not necessarily. But it's not important. As long as you learn how to use it, magic power will be part of your body, just like your limbs. Vendi opened the iron box and put the hot food on the bedside table. Sharon swallowed hard, and her stomach made a series of growling sounds. She blushed immediately. "Hungry?" Vendi smiled and brought the fresh soup made from bird's kiss mushrooms to Sharon. There were a few green onions floating on the pale yellow soup, and the circles of oil sparkled under the light of the stove. Compared to the bland vegetable soup, one could almost smell the aroma of meat and the fresh and fragrant soup. It was especially tempting. Based on His Majesty's practice of holding a banquet whenever he met a new witch, she had also learned to use delicious food to calm people's hearts. Sharon nodded her head vigorously. "Have some soup to warm your stomach first, then eat something else," Vendi said softly. Seeing the little girl wolfing down the food, even Sharon felt a little hungry. "Where's your friend? Has she gone back?" "Oh no. I think so," Sharon said while eating. "She didn't come to see you?" Vendi asked in surprise. "No." The girl shook her head. "After all, I'm from the Southern Territory, just like those people who bullied her. She probably doesn't fully believe me, right?" "Wait." Vendi could not help but be stunned. "You're from the Southern Territory?" "Yes." Sharon put a piece of bird's kiss mushroom into her mouth. "Mapletown, a small town near Eagle City? But now it's uninhabitable. I always thought that you and she both moved here from the East," Vendi said in surprise. "That's why you helped her. Can't I help her if we're not from the same place?" Sharon blinked and replied seriously, "The disputes between the nobles obviously have nothing to do with her. Those people were just looking for trouble. It has nothing to do with where she was born. Wrong is wrong. If I hadn't stood up at that time, no one would have been able to correct this mistake." Vendi was stunned for a while, and it took her a while to come to her senses. "Maybe you're worrying too much, Your Majesty," she thought. "This child doesn't need my comfort." The look in her eyes was unmistakable. She was sure of her choice. For the fastest and error-free novel reading, please visit You're Tuning In to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.